If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 81 Old Hogwarts Myth. As the bell signaled the end of class, every student walked out carrying a puppet shell with no core. Meanwhile, Kasenhis walked out carrying two, both with cores. Yesterday's puppet brother had just welcomed his new puppet little brother. Returning to his third-floor office, Kasenhis immediately resumed working on his half-finished elemental distillation machine. A massive amount of elemental crystals and blocks were fed into the machine. The system distilled them into elemental liquid, which then traveled through tubes and filled jar after jar. That was exactly how he had created the elemental vials he had handed out to the students in class. Now, he was working on the final step, the packaging assembly line. After carefully adjusting the mechanisms, he pulled the lever. The entire machine hummed to life, running with silent precision. Only when everything worked flawlessly did he finally seal the structure with glass. Now, it was time to relax. The golden era of slacking off had arrived. After all, with only 5 classes per week, no matter how much work he had, there was a limit. Which meant it was time to pick a fight with Lockhart. 1 week later, a strange rumor had spread throughout Hogwarts' student body. Somehow, people started saying that both the Alchemy Professor and the Defense Against the Dark Arts Professor were cursed, that these two professors could never peacefully coexist. As the legend went, when 2 tigers fight, one must fall. And in Hogwarts, this rule apparently applied to Alchemy Professors and Defense Against the Dark Arts Professors. At Hogwarts, the legend went like this. The 2 professors would inevitably battle. By the time the school year ended, only one would emerge victorious. The winner would continue teaching at Hogwarts. The loser? Best case scenario, they left injured. Worst case scenario, they didn't leave at all. This was what the younger students had overheard from the older ones. After all, before Kasenhis became the Alchemy Professor, the Defense Against the Dark Arts Professor position was already cursed. No one lasted long. At the time, students had only speculated about the defense professors. Then, in Kasenhis' very first year, he had with his unshakable fate and solid magic straight up gotten rid of Professor Quirrell. Yet, even then, people hadn't connected the dots. Then time passed. Before anyone knew it, this was Kasenhis' second year at Hogwarts. And once again, the Alchemy Professor and the Defense Against the Dark Arts Professor had become mortal enemies. Though, technically, this wasn't the second time. More like 1.5 times. Once again, the battle had begun. And once again, the Defense Against the Dark Arts Professor lost and things paused. It was only then that some of the sharper students started piecing things together. Why did no Defense Against the Dark Arts Professor last long at Hogwarts? Because the Alchemy Professor countered them. Why did the 1990 Defense Against the Dark Arts Professor, the one before Harry Potter's year, leave quietly without injury, simply resigning and going home? Because that year, the Alchemy Professor retired due to health reasons and left Hogwarts. Even though that Alchemy Professor didn't even finish a full year, he still managed to force the Defense Against the Dark Arts Professor to resign within half a school year. Then came 1991. Professor Quirrell? Dead. Yes, he deserved it, but the fact remains he was still dead. And now, this year. Because Professor Kasenhis' fate was even tougher than the last Alchemy Professor, he had nearly cursed this year's Defense Against the Dark Arts Professor before he even officially started teaching. Specifically, he had buried Lockhart headfirst into the ground. If it had rained, or if even a single bird had decided to relieve itself nearby, Lockhart might not have made it back out. Thus, a perfectly logical, thrilling Hogwarts urban legend began to spread among the students. And soon enough, 2 certain troublemakers took it upon themselves to document everything. Yes, the Weasley twins. Honestly, they had never put this much effort into their actual essays. This research paper contained detailed cause and effect analysis, fabricated Hogwarts historical records, various wild legends, even testimonies from ghosts and professors which, of course, were completely made up. The document, yes, that document was carefully slipped through the gap beneath the door of the Defense Against the Dark Arts office. Lockhart, ever the optimist, picked it up, assuming it was yet another anonymous love letter from one of his devoted admirers. "Hey, why am I so handsome?" With a confident smirk, he grabbed a letter opener, sliced through the wax seal, and prepared himself to bask in the warmth of adoration. Then he read it. What they? His once rosy complexion turned a ghastly, ghostly pale in an instant. Now, normally, as a proud Ravenclaw, Lockhart wouldn't be so easily rattled by a poorly written, obviously fabricated school legend. But unfortunately for him, he had been born just a little too late. By the time he entered Hogwarts, the cursed fate of the Defense Against the Dark Arts position had already been sealed by none other than Lord Voldemort himself. And now, as he dusted off the cobwebs of memory, he realized. During his entire 7 years at Hogwarts, there had indeed been 7 different Defense Against the Dark Arts professors. Meanwhile, the old alchemy professor had always been the very same old wizard who had only just retired 2 years ago. It couldn't be, right? Lockhart stared at the now sweat-drenched parchment in his trembling hands, single-handedly contributing to global warming with the sheer amount of stress-induced sweat pouring off him. He sat there, frozen in stunned silence, for a full minute. Not because he needed time to process the information, but because his legs had gone completely numb, and he physically couldn't stand up yet. Dragging his static-ridden, signal-lost TV legs behind him, the poor, unfortunate Professor Lockhart shuffled his way toward the headmaster's office, wincing with each agonizing step. At this moment, he was absolutely convinced that Dumbledore had set him up. And, as fate would have it, at that very same moment, somewhere else in the castle, a certain alchemy professor was thinking the exact same thing. Dumbledore. Lockhart stumbled into the headmaster's office with all the grace of a wounded hippogriff, collapsing into the chair opposite Dumbledore. His once perfectly styled, hairspray-infused locks were now drenched in sweat, plastered to his clammy forehead. With shaking hands, he slammed the infamous letter onto Dumbledore's desk. Is this true? Oh? What is this? Dumbledore calmly picked up the parchment, scanning its contents with his usual twinkling-eyed patience. After reading it from top to bottom, he finally looked up and spoke. You are a Ravenclaw, are you not? Tell me, why would a Ravenclaw believe in such nonsense? But I've never seen a single Defense Against the Dark Arts professor last more than a year. Lockhart protested, his voice rising in desperation. Dumbledore smiled knowingly, twirling the parchment between his fingers. Trust me, Lockhart, he said smoothly, his voice dripping with carefully measured reassurance. This is nothing more than an old Hogwarts myth. And a childish one at that. Ha ha ha, the little ones must be just pranking you. But, how am I supposed to believe you? Lockhart shouted, trembling. Oh, don't worry about that. I am the headmaster, after all. Of course, I have ways to make you believe me, Dumbledore said as he pulled out his elder wand from his sleeve. 10 minutes later, Lockhart walked out of the headmaster's office. After Dumbledore's friendly persuasion, he finally believed that the so-called conflict between the alchemy professor and the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor was nothing but nonsense. Until he turned the corner on his way back to his office, and saw a black notebook lying on the ground. Chapter 82 Professor, I want to learn alchemy. So, does that mean you're my senior? Lockhart held his quill and wrote this question on the book's page. Yes, I enrolled in 1938. Based on the timeline, I really am your senior. Lockhart used the feather of his quill to scratch his nose. He still had one question that Dumbledore had deliberately avoided answering, even trying to use both the forgetfulness charm and the confuse charm to make him disregard it. But no matter how much Dumbledore calculated, he failed to account for one thing: Lockhart was not entirely useless. In fact, in some ways, he was too clever. Otherwise, he wouldn't have managed to steal other people's achievements in the wizarding world for so many years before getting, well, caught just this once. After leaving the headmaster's office and realizing he'd been confounded, Lockhart immediately hit himself with an obliviate. By erasing the memory of being confounded, he effectively removed its influence, one of the more advanced applications of the forgetfulness charm. However, this also had an unintended consequence: it completely restored his fear of the terrifying Hogwarts urban legend. And so, he picked up his quill again and wrote directly to the senior wizard from a distant time. There's a rumor about Hogwarts that the professors of Defense Against the Dark Arts and Alchemy clash, and that by the end of the term, only one of them can walk away unharmed. Is this true? Why do you think that? Because I'm the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor, and since my time at Hogwarts, I've never seen one last more than a year. Also, last year's professor died before we even got to final exams. He didn't even make it. The Tom Riddle inside the diary was utterly baffled. In short, he did not understand, but he was deeply shaken. The fact that someone could actually believe such an absurd rumor only proved one thing: this so-called defense against the dark arts professor was nothing more than a complete idiot. Simply put, he could be used. What I'm about to tell you, you must not be afraid. The moment Lockhart saw this sentence appear on the page, his heart leaped to his throat. Is it true? Yes. Lockhart sank back into his chair, completely drained of strength, his mind racing for a solution. However, like a spring, he snapped back up, his eyes glued to the page. When I was a student, I had a defense against the dark arts professor. He was my mentor. We were incredibly close. He had mastered a method to resist that curse. In the end, he left Hogwarts not because of the curse, but because he simply grew old and retired. You know how? Lockhart scribbled frantically. I told you, he was my mentor. We were incredibly close. What he knew, I knew. Senior, can you, crossed out, could you tell me this method? It's very simple. Before that alchemy professor defeats you, strike first and take him down. Then, perform a ritual magic. The Tom Riddle inside the diary had already planned out exactly how he was going to deceive this bumbling idiot of a professor. His strategy? Trick Lockhart into ambushing the alchemy professor in the dead of night. After all, based on what this fool had said, the alchemy professor was younger, stronger in magic, and judging by the little bits of truth hidden in Lockhart's endless lies, he seemed to possess charisma and influence. Perfect. Much better suited to be Lord Voldemort's host than the useless buffoon currently writing in this diary. Kikikak. All he had to do now was forcefully seize the alchemy professor's body through a ritual, inheriting his power. Then, he would drain the life force of this pitiful excuse for a defense professor, ensuring that Lord Voldemort would return in his full glory right inside his beloved Hogwarts. When you say defeat, you mean? Lockhart wrote expectantly. Use the killing curse. His body must not be damaged in the slightest, it must be fresh. Absolutely not. Lockhart's forehead broke into a cold sweat. Did I judge wrongly? Inside the diary, little Tom was speechless. This cowardly excuse for a professor had the intent but lacked the guts. Pathetic. Then what will you do? Wait until the so-called curse breaks your limbs or leaves you dead on the podium by the end of term. I can't. I can't kill anyone. No, I won't listen to you. Lockhart, with his trembling hands, tried to slam the book shut. But just as the pages were about to close, a new line of text slowly surfaced. You don't have to kill. There are other ways. Lockhart's hands froze mid-action. His cowardice said, close the book. His ego said, keep reading. Guess which one won? Go on. First, I need you to trust me completely. Fine. Good. First, place both hands on the book. Lockhart followed the instructions, waiting for the next step. Now, channel your magic into the book. Lockhart hesitated for a brief second before doing as he was told. And then? There was no then. Meanwhile, in the alchemy professor's office. Oh, Merlin's soggy pants, is this still an office? The moment Neville stepped into the alchemy professor's office, he froze in place, staring wide-eyed at the towering, glass-encased machines humming around him. Yep, Kasenhis' voice echoed from the far end of the room, near the massive floor-to-ceiling window. Didn't I mention last Christmas that I was renovating my office? Well, this is the result. Neville took off running. By the time he finally reached the very distant desk, he was gasping for air. Professor, do you walk this much every time you leave your office? I mostly teleport. But a little cardio never hurts, right? Kasenhis shrugged. Over the holidays, Lupin and I even played ice hockey in here. Neville blinked. Ice hockey? Here. Yep. Just a casual game. Oh, right, wasn't that you in Flourish and Blots over the break? Why aren't you with your friends today? Neville hesitated. Well. He fidgeted. Professor, I came here because I want to learn alchemy. Kasenhis leaned back slightly. Hey. Saw that coming. But honestly, I still recommend waiting until your third year before taking my class. Alchemy is not like potions. It demands a strong magical foundation. Second years, well, your magic reserves are just too low. Take Cedric Diggory, for example. He's a fourth year now, but back in third year, he insisted on taking alchemy with the fourth years. Guess what happened? He did great. Neville guessed, hopeful. He passed out. Face first. On the work table. So yet, Kasenhis continued, trying to learn my kind of alchemy without enough magic? Dangerous. Especially since I specialize in enchanted alchemy. Neville hesitated. Professor, I don't think I completely understand. That's fine. Let's start with the basics. With a flick of his hand, Kasenhis summoned a steam-filled kettle, already heated to a rolling boil by shining radiance. A moment later, 2 cups of freshly brewed tea floated over to them. Chapter 83. This office is not ordinary. In alchemy, the one thing that relies least on magic is redstone. Kasenhis placed a redstone block on the desk. I've shown you before, but redstone still needs to be activated. You can think of it as a limitless power source, but first, it needs an initial charge. He tapped the block lightly. For example, if I build an alchemical construct that requires a certain amount of magical energy to run, we set that amount, let's call it X. Redstone, in this case, acts as the power source. If we inject X units of magic into regular redstone, it will continuously output that exact X amount. But Kasenhis smiled knowingly. Even this tiny X value would drain most of your magic. Want to test it? Here. He slid the small finger-sized piece of redstone toward Neville. The boy picked it up, immediately realizing that this looked different from the ones Kasenhis had given them before. Unlike those, this one was dull and lifeless. No glowing patterns, no magical resonance. So, the ones they had received earlier were already pre-activated by Professor Kasenhis. This is what redstone originally looks like. Neville clenched his fist, then focused. Slowly, he channeled his magic into the redstone bit by bit until he reached his limit. Finally, he set it back onto the desk, now glowing faintly. His palm was sweaty. His face was pale. But his expression remained determined. Oh! Kasenhis picked up the redstone, inspecting it before sighing in mild surprise. Not bad, good potential. He leaned forward. Now, tell me why. Neville swallowed hard before answering. I want to use alchemy to make gifts, for Harry and the others. They're my best friends. Even though I'm like this, they never look down on me. Kasenhis squinted slightly, amused by Neville's awkward expression. Barely passable. But at least your magical reserves are stronger than most second years. Neville's face lit up. So, Professor, does that mean, you agree? I agree, but Kasenhis tapped his desk. You can't keep this a secret from your 3 little friends. Or, well, you can keep what you're making a secret. That part is fine. A surprise gift? That's great. But learning alchemy behind their backs? That's not okay. If you really consider them your friends, don't hide it from them. Think about it, if you secretly start improving yourself while keeping them in the dark, it makes you look a bit sneaky. It might make them feel like you're not being honest with them. Of course, Kasenhis smiled, I know that's not your intention. He patiently explained his point. Neville scratched the back of his head. So what should I do now? Professor, can you maybe help me, act it out first? No need. Just tell them the truth. Or Kasenhis grinned. Bring them all here. I'll play the bad guy. I'll reject all of them and only accept you. Wait, what? Relax. They won't hold a grudge against me. Neville nodded slowly. Thank you, Professor. But I'll think of a better excuse. I already feel bad enough that you're letting me do this. Then, he turned around, and started running. Kasenhis watched Neville disappear into the distance, jogging back towards the castle. Should I build him a portal? He thought about it. Nah. Exercise is good for the body. Still, the thought of Neville running this entire distance every day just to learn alchemy made Kasenhis want to laugh. Pfft! What a cute child! Kasenhis snickered. Just then. Beep. 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 A red crystal ball on his desk flashed. He casually pressed it. A faint glow pulsed along the redstone wiring in the ceiling, and with a click the door in the distance swung open. And in walked Lockhart. Or rather, Tom Riddle, playing dress-up. Instinctively, Tom's gaze drifted toward what should have been the alchemy professor's desk. Instead, his eyes landed on. Is this a Quidditch stadium? Tom stepped into the massive alchemy office, looking around with genuine surprise. One corner of the room, separated by glass walls, housed a colossal machine. The towering structure whirred and clicked, operating with silent precision. Even with an outstanding in alchemy during his school days, Tom Riddle had no idea what he was looking at. Not even the slightest clue. The mechanisms. The purpose. The logic. Nothing made sense. Kasenhis, lounging in his chair, barely spared him a glance. What do you want? His voice dripped with disinterest. Tom, still masquerading as Lockhart, smiled. It was a perfectly practiced, charismatic smile. Even though it looked painfully out of place on Lockhart's face. I've come to mend our friendship. Having rummaged through Lockhart's memories, Tom naturally knew the source of their conflict. Kasenhis raised an eyebrow. Is that so? He leaned back, tone dripping with sarcasm. Well, I must thank you, oh great and mighty best-selling author, Gilderoy Lockhart. Tell me, why aren't you off in the wilderness, using that brilliant enchanted book therapy you supposedly invented to cure some poor werewolf? Kasenhis tilted his head, voice mocking. Oh? You can't? Do you need me to teach you? Or is that perfectly polished, empty little skull of yours too full of fake smiles to actually learn? Tom, still grinning, spoke smoothly. I sincerely apologize. That's precisely why I'm here today, to offer you my apologies. Kasenhis clicked his tongue, surprised that Lockhart had finally managed to say something remotely human. For once, it was enough for him to actually lift his gaze and look at the man properly. Human magic soul. Soul? Kasenhis frowned. That label was new. It hadn't been there this morning, not even during breakfast. And it certainly hadn't appeared the last time he buried Lockhart headfirst in the dirt. Yet here it was now. That was a problem, a serious one. Something was very, very off. It was the kind of warning sign that made him sit up a little straighter, resting his elbows on the chair's armrests as he narrowed his eyes. What do you want? Lockhart, or rather, Tom Riddle, wearing a Lockhart mask, kept his face perfectly composed, an air of sincerity radiating from his every movement. I've really come to seek your forgiveness. Yeah, right. As if. Kasenhis wasn't an idiot. He could see through the deception, and he had a pretty good guess at the real reason Tom was here. The bastard was sizing him up, trying to figure out exactly how strong he was. If Kasenhis turned out to be only marginally stronger than Lockhart, just a bit beyond an average professor, then Tom wouldn't hesitate. He'd go for the kill immediately, right here, right now, and finish the job before even stepping out of the office. But the moment he actually stepped into the alchemy office, things didn't quite go as he had expected. Sure, alchemists were known for their wealth, to the point where even their quills were practically enchanted artifacts. And yes, most of them tended to have a few precautions in place, maybe some enchanted armor, protective amulets, or the occasional nasty curse trap lurking in a corner. But Tom Riddle wasn't afraid of any of that. He had prepared for such things. What he hadn't prepared for, was this. This alchemy office was not ordinary. Forget everything else, the size of the place alone was ridiculous. It was nearly as large as the Black Lake. And then there was that thing hanging from the ceiling. A chandelier? No. It looked like one, sure, but right in the center of it was a gaping hollow space. And no matter how he looked at it, it looked an awful lot like the mouth of a cannon. Chapter 84, Just a Misunderstanding. Simply put, if he chose to make a move here, it would be a guaranteed death sentence unless he could strike a lethal blow in one shot before Kasenhis had the chance to react. Yet, that seemed a bit difficult. I'm very sorry, but I just don't think I can, Kasenhis said, lounging back in his chair, watching this so-called Lockhart through his monocle. Killing people was unlikely. After all, the lineup of Hogwarts professors could genuinely be described as a gang of battle-hardened lunatics if viewed from a dark wizard's perspective. That wand of Dumbledore's had certainly put more than a few dark wizards 6 feet under. And young Dumbledore? That guy had dueled his way from London to Paris, wand flashing like a sword, arms never tiring. Yet even he only had the standard human and magic tags under Kasenhis lens. Nothing weird. Which meant this. This was something else. A certain time-honored tradition of the defense against the dark arts professors, perhaps. Like, say, possession. Much like the previous year, when Voldemort took up residence inside Quirrell. The only question was who exactly had moved into Lockhart this time? What a pity, Tom Riddle wearing Lockhart's skin sighed, shaking his head. But to Kasenhis, all he saw was Lockhart's exaggerated, showy face being forcibly piloted by a soul far more composed and restrained. Now, he could be 100% sure this Lockhart was absolutely possessed. Tom Riddle, controlling Lockhart, showed no expression at the professor's quiet hum. He simply turned around and walked across the long stretch of the office towards the door. Kasenhis leaned back in his chair, watching coldly. Only when Tom reached the door after a few minutes did he suddenly extend his hand. A strong wind howled through the massive office. As threads of darkness intertwined with the growing storm, Tom turned his head in surprise. He saw Kasenhis still seated beneath the large window, relaxed as ever, just like when he had first walked in. The only difference was the hand he had stretched out at the center of his palm. A vortex swirled like a collapsing star, emitting an immense gravitational pull. Tom immediately turned his head back, unwilling to look again. Only now did he finally understand the so-called alchemy professor was no easy target. If he was a soft one, then Dumbledore was at most a slightly firmer fruit. But there was no time to think. With all his strength, he sprinted towards the door, reaching out to grab the handle. Just as he touched it, the force from the vortex pulled him back. Fuck! He's got me! In an instant, Tom reacted without hesitation. He pulled out his wand and turned around. Avada Kedavra! The deadly curse was blocked by a piece of obsidian, but at least it finally dispelled the eerie vortex's gravitational pull. Tom quickly cast 2 layers of the shield charm on himself and watched as Kasenhis slowly stood up. The latter pulled out his wand from his sleeve and toyed with it. I knew it. You're not Gilderoy Lockhart. That fool could never cast the killing curse. Tom gripped his wand tightly. Then if I hadn't resisted and you had caught me, would you have let me go? Not necessarily. Depends on my mood. Maybe I'd plant you in a flower pot. Got it. Avada Kedavra. Another killing curse shot toward him. This time, there was no sudden obsidian to block it, but when the curse hit the massive floor-to-ceiling window, it didn't even leave a proper crack. What's this? You're a weakling too? No, actually, Lockhart is stronger than you. At least he has his own body, while you, just a soul? A wandering ghost. The voice came from behind. Tom quickly turned around and saw Kasenhis standing there with his hands behind his back. Unbeknownst to him, eerie chains, formed from interwoven hexagons embedded with triangles, had silently spread from Kasenhis and completely surrounded him. Fiend fire! From the depths of his soul, Tom felt an instinctive rejection of these strange chains, something he had never seen before and couldn't control. Without hesitation, he unleashed fiend fire, trying to burn them all away. However, as fate would have it, the chains were the exact opposite of the chaotic and unruly fiend fire. They were formed using the order element that Kasenhis had previously extracted from an order crystal, allowing them to completely suppress the cursed flames. As soon as the fire was restrained, a water source block appeared and vanished in the blink of an eye. The fiend fire, which had just been raging wildly, disappeared without a trace. Tom's face paled slightly as he stared at the man in front of him, hands clasped behind his back, leisurely observing him. He swallowed hard, something he hadn't done in a long time. This feeling was eerily similar to that distant memory buried deep in his mind the moment Dumbledore had appeared in his room, casually waving his wand and setting his cupboard ablaze. Though the display of power between the two wasn't even remotely comparable, the sensation was exactly the same. That bizarre, oppressive feeling that made resistance seem utterly pointless, like the person before him wasn't even standing there to fight, but merely to observe, as if watching an experiment unfold or studying a pet's reaction. Are you ready to tell me who you are now? Kasenhis stepped forward and asked. As long as I don't say it, no one will ever know. Tom sneered maliciously. The things you've done always leave traces. Let me guess. There's nothing unusual about Lockhart's body, so you must have used some strange object as a medium to possess him. Kasenhis circled around Tom as he spoke. You guess. Looks like I hit the mark. Is that thing still on Lockhart? Let's be civilized about this, just tell me directly, and I won't have to strip the guy. Let's keep this dignified. You're the ones being undignified, you and Lockhart. What does this have to do with me? Kasenhis nodded. Fair point. Then, a crackling surge of electricity began to spark in his palm. Honestly, I really regret not learning the Cruciatus curse. Just as the lightning in his hand was about to make contact with Lockhart's body, Tom suddenly stuck out his tongue at him. I told you, as long as I don't want to be known, no one will ever find out who I am or where I came from. The next moment, Lockhart's body convulsed. In an instant, the eerie intelligence in his eyes vanished, replaced by a familiar clarity and stupidity. He stared at Kasenhis, whose face had darkened considerably, and at the crackling bolts of lightning in his hand. Swallowing hard, Lockhart said, "Oh. What? I think we might have a bit of a misunderstanding here." Chapter 85 The Magical Book? Gilderoy Lockhart? You back? Kasenhis glanced at him through the monocle. Human magic. The next second, Kasenhis swung his wand, sending a surge of wild magic tearing through Lockhart's robe. His monocle meticulously scanned him again and again. Nothing. Stay right here. Don't go anywhere. Kasenhis lips twitched as he snatched Lockhart's wand away. A metal cage instantly materialized around him with a clang. Then, with a loud whoosh, Kasenhis apparat straight into the Defense Against the Dark Arts office. There, he was immediately greeted by a startled shriek from a portrait of Gilderoy. Shut up! Kasenhis flicked his hand, knocking the portrait aside. This guy hasn't even died yet, and he's already made himself a talking portrait. Muttering mockingly, he began to ransack the entire office, flipping through every inch of it. Not here. With another sharp whoosh, he apparat back to his own office. He barely had time to glance at the caged Lockhart before his gaze landed on the glowing red crystal ball atop his desk. Pressing it, the distant door creaked open, revealing 4 Gryffindor students. Perfect timing. Keep an eye on him, and, fix his clothes before you let him wear them again. I'm off to find Dumbledore. With that, Kasenhis vanished in an instant, leaving behind only a scattering of purple sparks that slowly faded into nothing. I knew there would be a day when Professor Kasenhis and Lockhart ended up like this, Ron sighed, casting a side glance toward the distant cage, where a pale, very exposed Lockhart sat helplessly. I'm starting to believe that legend now, seriously, Harry chimed in. Meanwhile, Kasenhis materialized perfectly into the headmaster's office, appearing right in front of Dumbledore. Without hesitation, he casually snatched a hazelnut biscuit from the older wizard's hand. Stop snacking. Come to my office. Lockhart was just possessed by someone weird. Dumbledore gave a resigned sigh, glancing down at his now half-eaten biscuit before setting it aside and rising to his feet. He placed a hand on Kasenhis' shoulder, and the next moment, the two of them popped into the alchemy office. At the same time, the 4 Gryffindor students were still making their way over, keeping a safe and respectable distance from the cage where Lockhart remained. Children, would you mind fetching Professor Snape for me? Dumbledore called out to them. The 4 exchanged glances before instinctively shaking their heads. You want to give it a shot? Dumbledore subtly glanced at Kasenhis. Kasenhis shrugged. If even you can't get them to do it, what chance do I have? Try anyway. Fine. Go fetch Severus, would you? He's not that bad. Kasenhis sighed, directing his words at the group. Oh, fine. Times 4. Have you ever considered becoming headmaster? Not at the moment. But if you're willing to step down and make way for a better person, I'd be more than happy to shoulder that responsibility. Ahem. The two of them appeared in front of Lockhart, and Dumbledore patted Kasenhis on the shoulder. Kasenhis reached out and tapped the iron bars in front of him, instantly breaking them apart. Put some clothes on, Lockhart. Here. With a wave of Dumbledore's hand, Lockhart's previously shredded clothing was instantly repaired and draped back over him. Lockhart, however, was trembling all over, looking like a miserable little punching bag, completely pitiful as he stared at his tormentor, and the other tormentor who just so happened to be the biggest backer of the first tormentor. A deep, soul-crushing feeling of helplessness welled up in his chest. Quit acting pitiful. Do you even remember how you ended up in my office? Kasenhis crossed his arms and asked. I don't know. Lockhart's voice trembled as he responded. Try to remember, Lockhart. Anything you can recall will help, Dumbledore said gently. Lockhart shivered. I remember. When I left the headmaster's office, I found a book in a corridor corner. That book had a memory inside. I asked him whether the supposed curse between Hogwarts Defense Against the Dark Arts Professor and the Alchemy Professor was real. He said it was. So I asked how to break it. That memory told me to kill Kasenhis. But I absolutely never had such a thought. Kasenhis shrugged. Much appreciated. You're welcome. Wait, no. That's not what I meant. I was about to close the book when it said there was another way. It told me to pick it up the book itself and inject my magic into it. The next thing I knew, I was here. Then Professor His saw me and immediately beat me up like this, and threw me in a cage. OE. Me. Lockhart. Beaten like this sob. OE. My perfect hair is a mess. Lockhart sobbed dramatically, to the point where even the floor might start eroding from sheer disgust. Lockhart, do you know who owned that notebook? Dumbledore asked. No, I don't remember anything. Was the owner of that notebook a man or a woman? Were they a Hogwarts student or an ancient wizard? What era were they from? What was their approximate age? Dumbledore continued questioning. I don't know. I can't remember anything. It doesn't seem to be a normal obliviate. It's like he took my memories rather than erased them. Lockhart trembled for quite some time before finally remembering his current predicament. He hurriedly dressed himself properly at lightning speed. You're telling the truth? Kasenhis asked, his expression oddly skeptical. He seems to be telling the truth. Kasenhis, what do you think? Dumbledore turned to him. Well, since I talked to that soul when he came to my office. I don't think they were too old. Probably around 6th or 7th year age. That person was most likely a man. He gave me the feeling of an ordinary 6th year student, though a bit overly mature. But since he lacked the corresponding life experience, that maturity felt a little off. Like a child pretending to be mature. You know that whole chosen one syndrome? The kind of delusion where they believe they're destined for some grand mission? Most teenage wizards go through a phase like that, more or less. And another thing, he's likely a pure blood, or possibly from an aristocratic Muggle family. That aura he carried, along with that restrained and distant expression on his face, reminded me of Andrew Edwards, an insufferable client I had to deal with once, and Lucius Malfoy. Chapter 86, The Magical Number 7. Can't believe I'm saying this, but even when possessing the body of Lockhart, they managed to make him look charming. But I am charming. Shut it. The way the soul talked, I mean the pauses, phrases and demeanor looked similar to yours. Hey old man, why do you look like that? Ah. It's nothing. I just think I already know who that person is. Dumbledore let out a long sigh. Kasenhis understood immediately. A physical version of Muffliato was in order. He suddenly conjured a creeper head and plopped it right onto Lockhart's head in one swift motion. Who? Tom Riddle, you know who he is? Dumbledore said helplessly. Wait, seriously? How many times does this guy need to die? Dumbledore shook his head. In any case, we now know that Tom is currently possessing a book, and this book must be something he created during his 6th or 7th year. It likely contains a fragment of his memory or personality, much like a portrait. No, that's not it. Dumbledore turned to Kasenhis. It's not just a personality or a memory. It's a soul fragment, Kasenhis said seriously. What makes you say that? Dumbledore asked. For a moment, Kasenhis didn't know how to explain it. So, instead of fumbling for words, he simply took off the monocle from his eye, flipped it around, and held it up in front of Dumbledore's face. Human. Magic. MC? What does MC mean? Dumbledore asked in confusion as he peered through the monocle at Kasenhis's essence. Don't mind the details. Kasenhis put the monocle back on. What I'm trying to say is, when Voldemort was possessing Lockhart, Lockhart's status included soul. Soul. Dumbledore murmured, and after a long pause, he sank into his chair. He wasn't sure whether he should feel sorrow or despair. A man, beyond saving. He muttered blankly. What? Kasenhis asked. Tom is a man beyond saving. So he had already. Please be a little clearer with your words, Kasenhis said, pouring Dumbledore a cup of tea. He killed someone. If what was inside Lockhart was truly a soul, then that means, even back then, he had already killed someone, an innocent person. Using such a cruel method, he tore apart his own soul and created a Horcrux. That is the secret of his immortality, and also the secret of his growing madness, Dumbledore said with a grim expression. Horcrux. Dumbledore nodded. By murdering an innocent person for a dark ritual, one can tear apart their soul, attaching a fragment of it to an object, then using ritual magic to protect that object. This way, even if their physical body is killed, a piece of their soul remains tethered to the world, preventing them from passing on. They become a wretched spirit, trapped between life and death. He tore his own soul apart by killing someone. Who did he kill back then? Kasenhis asked. At that time. Moaning Myrtle. She was the only one. Now, she lingers as a ghost in Hogwarts, haunting the abandoned girls' bathroom on the second floor of the castle. Kasenhis took a sip of his tea. You're right. That guy truly is beyond saving. The crystal ball on the desk flashed red. Kasenhis pressed it, and the office door swung open in the distance. Snape walked in, momentarily startled by the absurdly large office. The next second, he simply cast a flying charm on himself, swiftly gliding over to the desk, pulling a chair towards him, and sitting down. He sipped his tea, glancing at the nearby Lockhart, who still had a creeper head covering his face and was swaying dizzily. Meanwhile, the four little ones had begun yet another round of extended physical training. Next time, I should bring my broomstick, Harry muttered. I think, that makes sense, Ron agreed. What is it? Did you accidentally knock Lockhart stupid and now need me to fix him? Snape asked, sitting in his chair and looking at Kasenhis. Kasenhis rubbed his chin, not saying much, while Dumbledore beside him looked slightly embarrassed. He had called Snape here to administer some Veritaserum to Lockhart, planning to pair it with Legilimency for a thorough body and soul interrogation. But now that they had already confirmed who was behind it all, to put it simply, Snape's presence was pointless. Don't tell me I came here for nothing, Snape said, looking at Dumbledore with narrowed eyes. Of course not. Just now, we have. Let's discuss this in the headmaster's office, Dumbledore said. And so, just as the four little ones finally caught their breath and reached the desk, Dumbledore grabbed Kasenhis and Snape and promptly apparatted away. Are they messing with us? Just having fun at our expense. Definitely Snape's idea. Even though, but, rude. Meanwhile, the secret to Voldemort's immortality has been uncovered. A truly wicked alchemical creation, a Horcrux. Dumbledore sat in his chair, speaking gravely. So that's how it is. As long as we find that Horcrux. Snape nodded. I don't think Tom would settle for just one Horcrux. A single Horcrux wouldn't be enough to turn him into that thing, neither man nor ghost. Dumbledore shook his head. Kasenhis and Snape exchanged a glance before simultaneously directing their deadpan expressions toward Dumbledore, clearly dissatisfied with his cryptic way of speaking. Bridget Wenlock discovered a number with magical significance, Dumbledore explained. Don't tell me. The most powerful magical number 7? He made 7 Horcruxes. Snape asked. I'm afraid so, Dumbledore nodded. How many do we know of? 1. His diary. Where is it? Kasenhis shook his head. Lockhart picked up that diary and ended up possessed by Voldemort. When I caught him and locked him up in my office, Voldemort's soul must have suddenly left his body. I searched Lockhart thoroughly, and I searched the office. The diary is nowhere to be found. A Horcrux, a fragment of a soul. Other than its ability to manipulate people, it should not even hold much magic. How did it disappear? Snape frowned. That idiot Lockhart followed Voldemort's instructions and poured his own magic into the diary, Kasenhis explained. Truly a complete and utter fool indeed. Snape sneered. Chapter 87 Talking with Myrtle. After a while, Kasenhis left the headmaster's office and reappeared in the alchemy office. He walked over to Lockhart, who was sitting in a corner, pulled the creeper head off his head, and promptly dismissed him. Now, on to the 4 little wizards. Surprisingly well behaved. The 4 of them were sitting quietly on the sofa, each holding a book from the stack under the coffee table, reading away. As Kasenhis sat down in his chair, the 4 little wizards finally booted up. Neville remained calm and composed, lounging on the sofa, while the other 3 turned to stare at Kasenhis in unison. What? Professor, I want to learn alchemy. This time, Kasenhis didn't beat around the bush, nor did he bother explaining unnecessary details. Instead, he directly pulled out 3 slightly larger redstone chunks than the one Neville had used earlier and placed them on the desk. Light them up, and I'll consider you all qualified. Of course, they need to glow to a noticeable degree. The three young wizards eagerly grabbed their respective redstone pieces and poured their magic into them with all their might. Neville watched as his three friends, each holding a redstone chunk slightly larger than his own, managed to make them shine even brighter than his. Then, Professor Kasenhis began to spout blatant lies with a straight face. Not quite good enough. If you force yourselves to study alchemy too soon, you're likely to get hurt. But I'm still more than happy to help you build a solid foundation. As he spoke, he bent down under his desk and retrieved a few alchemical notebooks. Take these and read through them. If you plan to officially take my class in the future, I think you'll manage to keep up. He handed one book to each of the four young wizards. Even Neville, who had already gotten a head start, received one. So, Professor, we're just not allowed to practice hands-on yet, right? But what if we only sit in and listen? Hermione asked. In fact, even sitting in on the lessons won't be necessary, Kasenhis replied. Because I won't be teaching in a traditional lecture style. Instead, I'll be using a much more inhumane method. Inhumane? Hermione was puzzled. Then, each of them was handed another book, runes textbooks. And these books, quite frankly, were visibly thicker than the Oxford Dictionary and even bigger than the benches in the Great Hall. Oh, Merlin's beard! Ron muttered, staring in shock at the massive tome in his hands, the kind that could knock someone out cold with a single swing. Kasenhis glanced at his wristwatch. It's almost curfew. Aren't you heading back? The four young wizards turned to look at the office door in the distance. Can we just sleep here for the night? Ron asked. Of course not. I have to go out tonight, Kasenhis shook his head. Oh, so professors go on nighttime adventures too? Kasenhis rapped his knuckles lightly against Harry's forehead. How can a professor's duties be considered a nighttime adventure? I'm simply conducting a routine patrol of the castle. Oh. Harry suddenly understood. So if you're patrolling the castle tonight? You're welcome to try, Kasenhis cut in. Or maybe you can even use that invisibility cloak of yours and see if I can still catch you. Ah, all right. Harry shrank back slightly. Soon, the four young wizards made their way toward the office door. Meanwhile, Kasenhis instantly shadow-stepped, appearing in front of the abandoned bathroom on the second floor of the castle. He raised his hand and knocked on the door. Hello, Myrtle. Miss? Or perhaps, fellow student? May I come in? Inside, only the gurgling sounds of the pipes echoed in response. Kasenhis knocked again. Who are you? A sharp voice rang out from within the bathroom. Kasenhis, Professor of Alchemy at Hogwarts. Oh. I know who you are. Come in. Kasenhis pushed open the bathroom door and stepped inside. His gaze fell upon a semi-transparent, grayish-white ghost sitting absent-mindedly on a toilet. Should I call you Miss Myrtle or Student Myrtle? Do I look old to you? Myrtle's voice suddenly sharpened. Of course not. I was just trying to show my respect. Kasenhis quickly shook his head. Oh, stop it. No one in this entire school respects me. I'm not even worth respecting. After all, I'm not outstanding, not pretty, not smart, not. Why do you think that? Kasenhis asked. Do I even need to think it? All I have to do is stand in front of a stranger, and the answer will come straight out of their mean mouths. Myrtle floated closer toward him. For example, you. Look at me. What kind of person do you think I am? Kasenhis tilted his head slightly, a habit of his whenever he observed others. Magic Soul Death Void. A kind person, Kasenhis spoke after a brief pause. Kind? Why would you think I'm kind? Myrtle asked in surprise, as if the word had never been used to describe her before. Based on what you said, the young witches and wizards at Hogwarts don't treat you well, but I've rarely heard stories about you pulling pranks or using cruel words to hurt others. While regular ghosts might not be able to pull tricks like Peeves, they can still jump out to startle people or chase them down with insults. But despite enduring insults you shouldn't have to bear, you never lashed out. At most, you hid in this bathroom, quietly, waiting for your feelings to settle. How could that not be considered kindness? A faint hint of color appeared on Myrtle's usually pale, grayish-white face. Maybe you're right. Could you say a little more? It's easy to say. You just haven't noticed your own good qualities. For example, your intelligence. You were a Ravenclaw, weren't you? Chosen by the Sorting Hat and recognized by Rowena Ravenclaw herself. You have every ability to become the kind of person you want to be, rather than waiting for others to discover the qualities you've overlooked. Kasenhis reassured her. Oh, thank you, but I'm still ugly, I still wear glasses, and I still cry all the time. For a brief moment, Myrtle seemed to be in better spirits, but just as quickly, her mood sank again. Oh, come on. Isn't that just how kids are during puberty? At least from an adult's perspective, you're doing just fine. Wearing glasses isn't something to be ashamed of. I wear glasses too. Crying isn't a big deal either. Last year, I had a student named Cassidy. Of course, she graduated this year. She cried a lot too, but just recently, she wrote to me saying she had joined the Department of Magical Law Enforcement at the Ministry of Magic. Myrtle's dull eyes lit up slightly as she looked at Kasenhis. I knew her. She was a good person. Kasenhis subtly wiped the sweat off his forehead. Teenagers were really hard to comfort. Luckily, he had at least a little talent for it. Chapter 88. Which would you prefer, a tire that tastes like cake or a cake that tastes like a tire? You're such a kind person. I almost feel like coming back to life just to take your class, Myrtle said as she slowly sank into the toilet, leaving only her head visible above the water. I really appreciate the trust, truly. And you're very polite, too. Speaking of which, why did you come here to see me? I don't believe anyone would visit a ghost just for fun, she said, her twin braids floating around like strands of seaweed in the water. My question might be a bit offensive. You might get angry when you hear it. Seeing as you're so polite, I'll forgive you just this once. Ask away. Kasenhis nodded. How did you die? Myrtle let out a long, drawn-out sigh, as if she was relieved to hear the question. Kasenhis only caught the tail end of it. That question isn't offensive at all. To me, death was like a second life. It was like a birthday, something worth celebrating. Then I guess my luck isn't bad. I picked the right question to ask. When I died, how I died? There was this insufferable girl who laughed at me. I don't know where she is now. Maybe she married a troll, or maybe she choked on a clam that day and died. Either way, I send her my magical blessings that she's not doing well in life. Well, to answer your question, I was crying that day, right here in this bathroom, until I suddenly heard a boy's voice. It was actually quite nice, deep and magnetic. I figured someone with a voice like that must be pretty handsome. It's just a shame the timing was all wrong. After all, this is the girl's bathroom. I turned around to remind him, and then I died. Kasenhis rubbed his chin thoughtfully. That's it. Myrtle nodded. That's it. Well, not entirely. I also saw these two big yellow-orange eyes. They looked like they belonged to some kind of huge creature. That's a very useful clue. Also, how exactly did you die? What was your body like when they found you? Just like that, unnervingly peaceful. Like I had just fallen asleep. I almost wish I had died looking uglier. Myrtle huffed. If I had, I could have scared that awful girl a bit more. If I had looked like the Bloody Baron or Sir Nicholas when I died, she definitely wouldn't have been able to handle it. That awful girl. The one I mentioned before, the one who laughed at me and drove me into this bathroom in the first place. And she was? Kasenhis asked curiously. I'm not telling you her name. For all I know, she's already dead in some forgotten corner of the world. I just want her name to disappear from existence forever, Myrtle said fiercely. I can understand that. Can I ask why you're asking about all this? Myrtle added. For the truth behind your death, to find the culprit, and to protect the current students, Kasenhis explained. You're a good person. He. Your actions suit that face of yours. Myrtle smiled, her eyes fixed on Kasenhis. Oh, thanks for the compliment. You're welcome. Just like how you complimented me. If you ever want to hear this kind of honest praise, feel free to come here anytime. Thanks. If I ever need to, I will. After getting his answers, Kasenhis bid Myrtle a polite and enthusiastic farewell, one that could only be described as a step away, 3 glances back. Of course, besides saying goodbye, he made sure not to look too closely at any part of the bathroom. After all, the sign outside clearly said girls. Coming in was already questionable, standing there and scrutinizing every inch of the place like some creep? That would be downright suspicious. Back in his office, Kasenhis dragged over a small portable chalkboard from the classroom downstairs and set it up in the corner of the office space. Using a piece of chalk, he wrote down 2 key points: 1. The massive yellow eyes, and 2. The perfectly intact body. With these 2 confirmed clues marked on the board, he planned to add any new information later, fitting them into place like puzzle pieces. It wasn't the most sophisticated method, but at least it was straightforward, though his old Muggle neighbor had always sneered at his primitive approach. If that guy were a wizard, things would be so much easier. I wouldn't have to be here staring at this damned chalkboard. Kasenhis muttered as he leaned back into his armchair. The next day. Class dismissed. After saying that, Kasenhis picked up the stack of draft papers on the podium, neatly tapped the corners together, then casually folded them into a thick paper airplane before tossing it into the trash bin. With a flicker of ender blink, he appeared right at the edge of the Forbidden Forest, outside Hagrid's hut. If someone at Hogwarts needed an expert on magical creatures, the first name that would come to mind was undoubtedly Professor Kettleben, the Care of Magical Creatures Professor. However, this particular professor possessed a rather admirable trait: in a 7-day week, he would teach all 5 years' worth of lessons in just 1 day, then spend the remaining 6 days wandering off to who knows where. Which meant, he was nowhere to be found. No problem. If Professor Kettleben was unavailable, there was always the second best expert on magical creatures. Knock, knock, knock. Moments later, the door swung open, revealing Hagrid in a flour-dusted apron. I'm baking some rock cakes. Come in and have a taste. Oh, course, if you manage to take some with ye, I'd be even happier, Hagrid said enthusiastically, ushering Kasenhis inside. Seated on Hagrid's sofa, Kasenhis stared down at the alleged rock cake in his hands. Chew, chew, chew. Hagrid, have you ever heard of tires? I do. Why? Which would you choose, a tire that tastes like cake or a cake that tastes like a tire? Kasenhis asked. Are you seriously thinking about this? At that, Hagrid's face turned a bit red. He discreetly began clearing away the rock cakes from the table. Maybe something else then. How about some bark biscuits? I'll need milk with that. Oh, course, wouldn't forget the milk. Soon enough, after swapping out the refreshments, Kasenhis exhaled in relief. He couldn't help but recall last year's 3-headed dog. Perhaps that big fella's chew toys were actually made from Hagrid's baking. Say what you will about the texture, at least the flavor wasn't bad. Another year's begun again. I swear, even Black Lake's lookin' sunnier than usual, Hagrid mused from the sofa, gazing out the window at the distant lake. Chapter 89. Neville is learning well. Hagrid, do you know of any magical creatures that have huge yellow eyes, can kill instantly, and leave the body completely intact? Kasenhis took a tactical sip of his tea. Yellow eyes, kills instantly, and doesn't damage the body. I only know 2 Nundu and basilisks. Basilisk can kill with its gaze, but its victim has to look directly into its eyes, while Nundu can kill with its breath. Why are you a skin? Hagrid scratched his head. Kasenhis stroked his chin, debating whether to tell Hagrid about Voldemort's Horcrux making a comeback. Eventually, he decided against it and deflected with another topic. You know the abandoned bathroom on the 2nd floor of the castle? The one where the ghost moaning Myrtle haunts? I'm investigating her cause of death. Oh, Hagrid suddenly looked a bit uncomfortable. Why'd you suddenly decide to investigate her? I might know a little about that. You know how I got expelled from Hogwarts? Hagrid said, looking a bit awkward. Now, let me say this first: I didn't kill nobody. I was framed. And the one who framed me? Oh, he's real famous now, Hagrid huffed, warming himself with another sip of tea. What do you mean? You know the Dark Lord went to Hogwarts back in the day, right? I know. Of course, I know, Kasenhis nodded. It was him. He's the one who framed me. Myrtle Warren died in that bathroom, and the school launched an investigation. And who do you think went and reported me? Tom Riddle. He told the school it was my acromantula, Aragog, that did it. But first off, Aragog promised me he'd never hurt anyone. And second, even if we assume for the sake of argument that it was Aragog, Myrtle's body wouldn't have been left untouched like that, Hagrid said, viciously biting into his rock-hard biscuit. Who's Aragog? He's a giant acromantula. He lives in the Forbidden Forest now, Hagrid replied. Kasenhis took a sip of tea, recalling the 8-eyed acromantula specimen he had once seen in Snape's office. Honestly, Voldemort bringing attention to acromantula living in the castle might have been the only decent thing he ever did in his life. And then? Go on. Kasenhis gestured for Hagrid to continue. After that, well, it all went downhill. The Ministry, those fools didn't care about Myrtle's perfectly intact body. After all, she was Muggle-born. Her parents only knew about the wizarding world in theory, Hagrid muttered, voice heavy with bitterness. The Ministry didn't bother with a proper investigation. They just needed someone to blame. As long as they could close the case quickly, they'd look like they were doing their job. They punished me, declared the school safe again, and made sure to send a message to wizarding parents that Hogwarts was still a good place to send their kids. Hagrid leaned back in his chair with a heavy sigh, his frustration palpable. By the way, it's been decades. Why are you suddenly investigating this now? Hagrid asked, narrowing his eyes. At first, I was just looking for the creature that killed Myrtle, Kasenhis admitted. But now? Now there's another reason. He tapped his diamond pickaxe against Hagrid's infamous rock-hard biscuit, breaking off a piece and dunking it into his milk. Or do you actually want to keep living with the title of murderer on your name? Oh, thank you, Kasen. No problem. About the creatures you mentioned, the Nundu and the Basilisk, do you have any detailed records on them? Or at least know where I can find them? I'll put together some notes for you and hand them over later. Appreciate it. Hagrid leaned forward, his massive palm giving Kasen a gentle pat on the shoulder. It's me who should be thanking you. You're helping me clear my name. I don't have your kind of magic, I'm not as quick-witted as you either. I can't do much to help you with other things, but at least I know magical creatures better than anyone. I can't just sit here, stuffing my face with rock cakes and drinking hot coffee, while you're out there running around Hogwarts in the rain, solving this mystery for me. I might be clumsy with a wand, but I can do my part in the ways I know how. Okay. But just so we're clear, I'm not doing this for you. Or rather, you're just a bonus. My real priority is Myrtle, the victim, and the students who could become the next victims. Kasen reached out to pat Hagrid's shoulder but, realizing the enormous tea table between them, settled for giving Hagrid's giant head a quick pat instead. For the first time, Kasen heard a slight wobble in Hagrid's voice. Sensing the moment, he decided not to say anything further and quietly slipped away. After all, for a big guy like that, some dignity had to be preserved. Back in his office, Kasen picked up a piece of chalk and wrote Nundu and Basilisk on the blackboard. Then, he stood there, staring at it intensely. A few minutes later, aside from making his eyes sore, he had made zero progress. Deciding to put the brainstorming on hold, he tucked the chalk behind his ear, reached under his desk, and pulled out a bottle of grape juice, the fermented version. Just as he was rummaging through his cabinet for a wine glass, the red crystal ball on his desk suddenly lit up. Kasen absent-mindedly pressed it, and the office door swung open. This time, Neville had learned his lesson. Instead of running across the ridiculously large office, he glided in on a broomstick. From the look of it, he had borrowed Harry's Nimbus 2000 and was slowly but steadily floating over. Given Neville's usual broom-riding skills, he obviously wasn't flying as fast as the Quidditch team members, but at least he wasn't trudging across the room on foot this time. Hello, Professor. Here for a lesson, or something else? Kasen instinctively reached for a second glass to pour a drink for Neville, then suddenly realized something was off. With a quick change of course, he swapped it out for a cup of tea instead. Neville sat down and pulled a piece of parchment from his pocket, spreading it out on the desk. This is something I designed for Harry. Since he's a seeker, he has to wear both goggles and glasses, which is really uncomfortable. So, I wanted to make him a pair of glasses that could shield his eyes from the wind, work as protective goggles, and not fall off during a match. Kasen leaned in and examined the parchment. To call it a blueprint would be a bit of an overstatement. It was more of a concept sketch. The only thing on the front was a rough drawing of round glasses, accompanied by some descriptions of their intended effects. Not a bad idea. Have you thought about the materials and runic engravings for it? They're on the back, Professor. Kasen flipped it over and gave it a glance, then nodded in approval. Not bad. You're learning well. Well, actually, I asked the Ancient Runes Professor for help. Neville rubbed the back of his neck, looking a bit sheepish. Chapter 90 A Huge Snake. Neville stayed up late in the office crafting the glasses, meticulously polishing the crystal into lenses, casting mithril into the frames, and finally assembling them. Once everything was completed, all that remained was to apply the prescription magic to the lenses and perform deep-level enchantments. Ha! This is exhausting, Neville muttered, carefully placing the half-finished glasses into an exquisite case before stretching his back with a groan. Haha, I'll walk you back to the common room. Wouldn't want Filch catching you and making you do extra detention, Kasenhis smiled lazily as he put on his coat. He watched Neville ride his small broom at a leisurely pace toward the office door before teleporting with an ender pearl to appear beside him. For the next step, I'll help you reorganize the rune symbols you've written. From now on, only enchant once per day, and only a small section at a time. This way, you won't burn yourself out. It's not a serious problem, but if Hermione finds out, you'll be in trouble, Kasenhis added with a look of genuine fear. I think I'll be fine. That kind of situation only happens to you, Professor Kasenhis. I doubt I'd end up in the same mess, Neville said. I'm not talking about how Hermione would handle you, I'm saying you should avoid magical exhaustion. Yes, Professor. The two walked down the corridor together. Suddenly, a flicker of words passed across the monocle. Magic flesh soul. Kasenhis immediately grabbed Neville by the scruff of his neck and yanked him behind him without a second thought. A wand silently appeared in his hand, and countless tiny glowstones spread across the corridor, illuminating every inch. Who's there? Come out. The brightly lit corridor was completely empty. Stay here and hide. Close your eyes. They will protect you, Kasenhis ordered, summoning 4 iron golems around Neville in an instant, forming a tight protective barrier around him. Close your eyes. Don't look at anything. It might really be one of those 2 creatures Hagrid mentioned. After speaking, Kasenhis narrowed his own eyes and carefully stepped forward, keeping his movements as light as possible as he approached the corridor's corner. After all, even though both Nandu and the basilisk have yellow eyes and can eat you without your content, Hagrid had said that the basilisk could kill if one made direct eye contact with them, so with the bodyguards guarding him, it should be good just to keep your eyes shut. As long as he was cautious and avoided direct eye contact, Kasen should be able to take them down. But those words flesh and soul. Did Voldemort possess one of the creatures? He muttered to himself, keeping his gaze lowered while trying to observe the empty corridor as carefully as possible. Then he heard a scream. Ward off? What the hell is this? Close your eyes. Wait for me. Kasenhis instantly recognized the voices. It was the Weasley twins. He had no idea which one had shouted, but that didn't matter. He raised his voice and barked out a command. Getting mauled by a beast or cursed by dark magic might mean losing a limb, but it was still better than being stared to death on the spot. There was no time to think. He immediately teleported to the source of the scream. One of the twins was already lying on the ground, turned into a solid stone statue. The other was crouched in a corner, covering his eyes with one arm while wildly flinging hexes and curses in every direction with his wand. Weasley, stop! Kasenhis ordered. Professor Kasenhis? What happened to George? Was he hit with a full body bind curse? Fred, upon hearing Kasenhis's voice, let out a breath of relief and lowered his arm, revealing a comically oversized enchanted eye on his face. Then, his gaze landed on George, frozen in place, completely turned to stone. Kasenhis bent down and carefully propped George up, noting that he, too, was wearing an exaggerated pair of enchanted glasses. But now wasn't the time to worry about that. Through his monocle, Kasenhis saw George's status. Human magic rock. It looks like he's still alive. Take George with you, we need to find Neville first. He's here too. All right, Fred sighed in relief upon hearing that George was still alive. He quickly cast a levitation charm, making George float beside him as he followed Kasenhis. Before long, the 3 of them met up with Neville. After dismissing the iron golems, they all headed straight for Gryffindor Tower. Kasenhis had no interest in continuing Neville's lessons tonight. Neville, sensing the mood, didn't ask any questions. He simply walked in silence with the group until they reached the fat lady's portrait. After waking her up, they slipped one by one into the Gryffindor common room. Neville, go to bed first. Don't say anything about this for now, wait until the morning. Neville nodded, looking like he wanted to say something, but in the end, he kept quiet and slowly made his way to the staircase leading to the boys' dormitory. Who attacked you? Kasenhis asked, placing George onto one of the sofas and turning to Fred. "George should have seen it, I didn't. And what exactly are those things on your faces?" Night vision glasses. Flashing lumos while sneaking around makes it easier to get caught. Prepare to lose some house points." Kasenhis sighed, rubbing his temples in exasperation. In the blink of an eye, he disappeared, leaving behind only a few faint traces of purple light. Fred was utterly bewildered. Before he could process everything, a loud boom sounded again, and Kasenhis reappeared in the common room, this time with a very sleepy-looking Dumbledore in tow. "Take a look. Is this the full-body bind curse?" Dumbledore pulled out the Elder Wand and cast the counter-curse on George. After a long moment, he shook his head. "Strictly speaking, this is not the full-body bind curse, or at least, not one cast by a wizard." Hearing this, Fred, who had been casually using George's petrified form as a makeshift hook to hang his glasses, immediately froze. His face went pale with fear as he looked at Kasenhis and Dumbledore. "What do you mean? Is he going to die?" "Rest assured, he is not dead. Madame Pomfrey will be able to heal him," Dumbledore reassured him gently. Meanwhile, Kasenhis, unfazed, pulled out a glass of milk and continued examining petrified George. Judging by the state of his body, he must have been turned to stone so suddenly that he hadn't even had time to open his mouth. With that thought, Kasenhis laid George down horizontally on the sofa, then unceremoniously poured the milk into his, well, not his brain, but his ear canal. "Kasenhis, what are you doing?" Dumbledore asked, visibly bewildered and utterly shaken by what he was witnessing. "This is alchemy. You wouldn't understand, so don't interrupt me," Kasenhis replied dismissively as he decided to modify the milk's properties. In an instant, the liquid milk vanished, leaving only a radiant white glow hovering in his hand. Slowly, he pressed the glowing energy into George's chest. The next moment, "Gah! Cough, cough! Ha! I'm alive!" George gasped, bolting upright with a look of pure terror. "Hello, Mr. Weasley, glad to have you back, but I can't help but ask. What actually happened and what did you see?" Dumbledore stepped forward immediately, not waiting for Kasenhis to explain what had happened. "A snake. A huge snake." Chapter 91 Dumbledore, I know nothing about alchemy. Ahem. "Kasenhis, you need to come with me," Dumbledore said, adjusting his slightly slipping half-moon glasses as he reached out to pat Kasenhis on the shoulder. But Kasenhis was in the middle of speaking. "Gryffindor, minus." Before he could finish, Dumbledore activated apparition with a soft whoosh, and the two of them vanished. "So, does that mean we're off the hook?" George, still shaken from his near-death experience, rubbed his nose and asked hesitantly. "Looks like, we are." "Ho-hum." Another loud boom echoed through the common room. "Gryffindor, minus 10 points. For sneaking out at night," Professor Kasenhis stated flatly. With that, he disappeared again, proving himself a master of the art of coming and going like the wind, leaving behind no trace, no shadow. Except for Gryffindor's 10 fewer points. Wait, no, he also took the Weasley twins' custom-made night vision goggles with him. Hey! Meanwhile, in the headmaster's office. "It seems you're quite invested in this. But I still can't figure out where you pulled out such a massive blackboard from," Dumbledore remarked, visibly surprised as he watched Kasenhis casually retrieve an entire blackboard from his ring. Kasenhis had no intention of explaining. He couldn't exactly say, "My office 2.0 is high-tech. The entire second-floor office is basically one giant ender chest." Even though that was the truth, he still chose to remain silent. Ever since his office had been upgraded to version 2.0, it wasn't just a matter of pulling out a blackboard from his ring. If someone were inside his office, he could quite literally yank them out with the same method. "Don't mind the details. What matters is that we now have two key pieces of information," Kasenhis continued. "First, when I was in the corridor, I saw what was lurking in the shadows through my monocle. It's definitely this so-called basilisk. And Voldemort, he must be possessing it. Because at that moment, I saw the word soul in the status bar. Second, magically enchanted lenses can weaken the basilisk's deadly gaze to some extent. But regular prescription glasses? Useless. Moaning Myrtle is proof of that." "You're planning to give all the young wizards enchanted glasses?" Dumbledore asked. "And then let the basilisk petrify them into stone, only for it to whip its tail around and smash their bodies to pieces." "I wasn't going to do that," Kasenhis deadpanned. Of course you wouldn't. That would be incredibly stupid, Dumbledore said matter-of-factly. Meanwhile, Kasenhis, who had been manually crafting a pair of glasses for about 5 seconds, felt a bit awkward as he rubbed the lenses between his hands. Didn't you just say you were worried the basilisk might whip the young wizards to bits with its tail? Ahem, this is different, Kasenhis coughed. I've designed a rather interesting mechanism for this. The basilisk's eyes, aren't they basically condensed death elements? That's not quite right. A basilisk isn't Medusa, Dumbledore corrected. If it holds no hostility toward you, its gaze won't automatically kill you. But a basilisk possessed by Tom, now that's a different story. So that's why I didn't detect any death elements at the time. Kasenhis muttered. But if my guess is correct, the basilisk's eyes transmit a death element signal to its victims. Dumbledore nodded. That should be correct. In that case, we can use alchemy to do something rather interesting. Kasenhis pulled out an enchanting table and swiftly inscribed runes onto the glasses, enchanting them with magic resistance and delayed shattering. Now let's give it a duplicate to pair effect. Dumbledore tapped his wand on the glasses, and in an instant, they split into two, one original and one duplicate. Kasenhis placed the original glasses on the table, then pulled out a chest. He carefully placed the duplicate glasses inside before setting up a comparator, redstone wiring, a redstone torch, and a piston. Since the comparator detected an item inside the chest, the redstone signal it output caused the redstone torch to turn off, preventing the piston from activating. Finally, Kasenhis set up a bubbling water column using a magma block in front of the piston. He tossed an ender pearl into the column, and it immediately started bouncing up and down inside the bubbling water. This represents the essence of death, similar to what the basilisk's eyes produce. Just to be safe, I also took the twins' night vision glasses. With the overlap of two different magic effects, at least one of them should work, Kasenhis explained excitedly, holding a pair of glasses in one hand while summoning a concentrated essence of death in the other, something he had previously synthesized using chaos and fate. He eagerly introduced his setup to Dumbledore. Dumbledore, completely baffled and having absolutely no idea what he was looking at, maintained his usual composed demeanor, quietly observing as if he understood everything. All right, I can tell you don't get it. You can just ask, you know, Kasenhis said bluntly, seeing right through Dumbledore's act. What exactly is this supposed to do? Good question, Kasenhis said, placing the primary glasses on the table. We're using this essence of death to simulate the basilisk's lethal gaze. With a flick of his wrist, he sent a concentrated stream of death essence toward the glasses. The moment it passed through the lenses, the glasses absorbed the majority of its power. About a second later, crack. The entire pair of glasses shattered into pieces. Simultaneously, inside the chest, the duplicate pair of glasses also crumbled into dust, as it was linked to the original. The comparator, no longer detecting an item inside the chest, deactivated the redstone signal. This, in turn, caused the connected redstone torch to flare up, activating the piston. With a loud clunk, the piston extended forward, pressing directly onto the bubbling water column. The bouncing ender pearl was forcefully pushed out and shattered upon impact. Boom! In an instant, Kasenhis suddenly teleported to the exact location where the ender pearl had broken. Well? Do you get it now? Kasenhis asked, looking at Dumbledore expectantly. Nicolas Flamel wasn't lying about you. I don't understand a damn thing about alchemy, Dumbledore admitted, still in a daze. So? What do you think? Kasenhis pressed on. You want to set up this mechanism, Dumbledore began, organizing his thoughts. Pair it with the enchanted glasses, creating a teleportation system where the basilisk's lethal gaze is reduced to only a petrifying effect due to the glasses' enchantment. Then, once the glasses shatter from absorbing the impact, the device activates, smashing the ender pearl, instantly teleporting any petrified student to a safe location within a second. That's exactly it, Kasenhis nodded. Dumbledore, having fully processed the plan, sat down in a chair and adjusted his glasses on the bridge of his nose. I still don't understand a damn thing about alchemy. Didn't you just say that? Kasenhis raised an eyebrow. I was simply emphasizing my amazement. Every time I meet someone as extraordinarily gifted as you, I can't help but marvel at the greatness of both magic and fate. Dumbledore exhaled deeply, still caught between awe and confusion. Chapter 92 The Miserable Workday. Agreed. Dumbledore took a tactical sip of his cappuccino. You really are straightforward. That's one of my strengths. Now, the next problem is that this Ender Pearl only works for me, no one else can use it. Dumbledore glanced at Kasenhis. You're not planning to use me as a test subject, are you? Unless you'd rather I experiment on the young wizards. Fine. Dumbledore sighed in resignation. Thus, the rest of the night was spent with the two of them holding an Ender Pearl, trying every possible method to alter its teleportation function. This included but was not limited to enchanting, using an anvil, cursing it, and more. Eventually, at his wits' end, Kasenhis decided to fall back on a classic concept straight out of old-school fantasy novels. Blood recognition. And it worked. So, we just wasted an entire night in the office over something this simple, Dumbledore said helplessly. This is absolutely, Kasenhis grumbled, gulping down a glug of healing potion. I feel like you of all people shouldn't be the one saying that. A glint of amusement flashed in Dumbledore's eyes. Judging by your state, perhaps we should install a pile of cushioning mats in the room to prevent injuries. I could also shrink the device so that it directly teleports them to their beds, assuming they don't get petrified in too ridiculous a position, Kasenhis pointed out. That would be helpful. First, make a prototype. We need to demonstrate it to the students. We also need to design glasses that are stylish and elegant. You don't interact with students much as headmaster, but trust me, some of them would rather face the threat of death than wear ugly glasses that ruin their charm. Then this lovely task. Before Dumbledore could even finish his sentence, Kasenhis quickly interrupted, this task is all yours. I trust you to use alchemy to craft glasses they'll love. After all, transfiguration-based glasses would conflict with the later enchantments. No, after meeting you, I can fairly say that I don't understand a damn thing about alchemy. Dumbledore, would you really exploit a poor professor who has dedicated his entire life to the noble cause of education? Oh, fine. After receiving Dumbledore's reluctant agreement, Kasenhis immediately teleported back to his office. On the way, he also swung by Professor McGonagall's office to grab a student roster. Every student, plus the professors. Honestly, crafting that many teleportation devices sounded like a nightmare. As he was pondering this daunting task, his gaze landed on the two mysterious golems playfully wrestling beside his desk. Evening, Great Hall. Kasenhis, holding an opaque insulated cup, lazily strolled into the Great Hall, where nearly all the young wizards had gathered. Meanwhile, the only other person in the castle who could even remotely claim expertise in alchemy, Dumbledore, was currently swinging alchemical tools so aggressively that sparks were flying off the enchanting table. With each completed pair of glasses, he quickly barked out, next. Slurp. Kasenhis stood leisurely behind him, sipping his drink while observing alongside Snape, who was watching with a rather amused expression. This is quite the sight, isn't it? Snape remarked with a sneer. As a member of Hogwarts, I must say, it warms my heart to see our esteemed headmaster rediscovering the youthful energy of hard labor. Severus, if you have nothing better to do, could you at least refrain from making sarcastic comments? Dumbledore said without looking up, his hands still busy working the alchemy station. There are so many students crammed around me that even the house elves wouldn't be able to squeeze through. If you're free, kindly fetch me something to drink. Oh, of course. Snape's gaze shifted toward the insulated cup in Kasenhis' hand. Do you dislike him? Not really. Kasenhis instinctively wanted to refuse, but then a fun idea popped into his head. With a completely natural expression, he handed the insulated cup over to Snape. Kakeek. Snape, in turn, passed it to Dumbledore. Dumbledore unscrewed the lid and took a sip. Then, he fell silent. After a long pause, he snapped his fingers, and the liquid inside the cup suddenly ignited with a soft blue flame. He turned around and, sure enough. That was from Hogshead Inn, right? Since you are here, why not help me? Dumbledore looked like he wanted to murder someone. No, believe it or not, I just happen to look like Professor Kasenhis. I'm actually his twin brother. Completely incapable of alchemy. All right, let's get on with the demonstration of the teleportation device for the students. As he spoke, Kasenhis casually conjured a new pair of glasses by hand and enchanted them with magic resistance. Stepping onto the platform, he addressed the gathered students. Students, has Headmaster Dumbledore told you why you're here? A basilisk is lurking in the shadows of Hogwarts Castle. These enchanted glasses are an essential tool to help you survive an encounter with it. And paired with them is this little device right here. He scanned the crowd of young wizards before selecting a participant. "Mr. Morgan, come up and assist me." Morgan quickly climbed onto the platform. "It would be an honor, Professor." "All right, I need a drop of your blood." Morgan nodded, not even bothering to draw his wand. Instead, he simply rubbed his fingers together, casting a minor cutting curse to create a small wound. After smearing a bit of his blood onto the ender pearl, he muttered the counter curse, and in the blink of an eye, the wound healed completely. "Fear it, children. This is a step each and every one of you must take unless, of course, you happen to have a nosebleed today," Kasenhis declared dramatically as he placed Morgan's blood-bound ender pearl into the bubbling water. Then, he took the freshly crafted enchanted glasses and handed them to Snape. "Would you mind duplicating these?" In no time, a primary pair and a duplicate appeared in Kasenhis' hands. He placed the duplicate into the teleportation machine's chest. These glasses are enchanted with a composite spell that absorbs the basilisk's deadly gaze, reducing instant death magic to a reversible petrification effect. Let's have a round of applause for the Weasley twins. One of these spells was actually their invention, though their original purpose was just for sneaking out at night. A few scattered laughs and claps came from the audience. The second enchantment causes the glasses to shatter upon absorbing dark magic. At the same time, the duplicate pair in the chest will also break. This signals the machine that you are in danger, prompting it to smash your bound ender pearl. The moment you are petrified, the shattered ender pearl will teleport you back. Got it? The young wizards below the platform nodded in unison. Good. Let's test it. Kasenhis casually placed Morgan's machine in the corner, then cast a dark magic spell directly onto the glasses. Ugh! Excellent! It might hurt a bit, but don't worry, by the time this happens for real, you'll already be petrified and won't feel a thing. Now, once you've finished crafting your own glasses, come to me. I'll adjust your machine and enchant your glasses. After Kasenhis finished speaking, he also set up a small table in the auditorium and began his miserable work. Chapter 93 Hogwarts Full of Glasses. Kasenhis swiftly enchanted each pair of glasses, then placed the blood-bound ender pearl into the miniaturized teleportation device. Finally, he packed the duplicate glasses by Snape already pre-enchanted into the chest. Next, place the machine by your bedside or anywhere safe. Always wear your glasses. Don't take them off unless absolutely necessary. Wait, let me add a binding curse. These things feel like you're not even wearing them anyway. Bathing, sleeping, it won't bother you. Plus, they have a built-in cleaning charm, so you never have to wipe them. Super convenient. He quickly cast the binding curse onto the glasses and handed them to the student in front of him. "Professor, when can I take them off?" "Once we've killed that basilisk." Next. Time passed, and Kasenhis actions shifted from mechanical efficiency to mind-numbing repetition. That was, until someone familiar sat down in front of him. Among the rare few wizards who already wore glasses, this student hadn't gone to Dumbledore for a custom pair. Instead, he stubbornly handed over his current glasses, the same style as his father's, straight to Snape. Snape, with a stiff expression, duplicated them with a twin copy charm, then returned them to Harry with enough force to suggest he could crush a troll's skull barehanded. These glasses are pretty old. Ever thought about getting a new pair?" Kasenhis addressed Harry, but his gaze shifted toward Neville, who was standing further back in the queue. Neville, noticing the look, hesitated for a moment before steeling himself and pulling out the glasses he had made for Harry. Kasenhis waved Neville over. "This is a gift I made for you. Though it's nothing compared to what Professor Dumbledore crafted." Neville mumbled awkwardly, standing beside Harry. "No. It's precious. I don't want it to become a sacrifice," Harry said as he took the glasses. With a flick of his wand, he transfigured a delicate glasses case and carefully placed Neville's gift inside. "This." Seeing Neville's hesitation, Kasenhis spoke to Harry. "Why not? A gift made by Neville himself that can literally save your life sounds like a good deal, doesn't it?" "But..." Harry touched the glasses in his pocket, glanced at Neville, then finally made up his mind. Taking a deep breath, he turned and walked back toward Snape, glasses in hand. Neville let out a relieved sigh. Looking back at his original spot in line, he saw that the students had still left a place for him. But realizing how much time he had already taken at the front, he chose to move to the end of the queue. Snape, in a rare display of gentleness, duplicated Harry's new glasses with noticeably softer movements than usual. After retrieving his glasses, Harry glanced back at Neville, who was now at the very end of the line. After a moment's thought, he patted the shoulder of the student standing behind him in line and silently followed Neville to the back. Wow! Ron, already wearing his new glasses, sat on the steps of the Great Hall beside Hermione. Both had a glass of lemonade in hand, with 2 unopened ones resting at their feet. I now get why Professor Kasenhis had Neville learn alchemy in advance. Turns out, it was so he could make a gift for Harry, Ron said before taking a long gulp of his lemonade. We should get one too, right? What do you think Neville will make for me? Maybe it's something you already have. Oh. How about I write Neville a Christmas limited edition card this year? I think I'll pass. I don't have anything special to give Neville, so I won't write one. No matter what he gives me, I'll be happy with it. Merlin's beard, that's going to hurt Neville's feelings, Hermione sighed. Trust me, Neville would love to know what kind of gifts you actually like. Otherwise, think about how exhausting it must be every Christmas Eve, racking his brain to figure out what to get you. You've got a point. Do you think Neville would like a complete set of chocolate frog cards? That's about the only thing I have that's worth anything, Ron said, setting his lemonade down and resting his chin in his hands. Neville's a very good person. No matter what you give him, he'll be happy. Trust me. That'd be ideal. Time passed quickly, and soon Kasenhis finished calibrating the last student's teleportation device. He stretched with a satisfied sigh. Now, it was time for the professors. Dumbledore, Professor McGonagall, and Professor Flitwick already wore glasses, so their devices were quickly adjusted. However, unlike the students, their glasses weren't enchanted with the binding curse after all. Professors had at least basic self-awareness. It wasn't exactly a difficult decision to choose between fashion and survival. After processing 2 or 3 more professors, just as things were wrapping up, Professor Sprout, who had already finished earlier, suddenly returned. This is Lockhart's. He was too afraid to come see you himself, so he asked me to bring it, along with his blood, Professor Sprout said with a sigh. Oh, for Merlin's sake, is he a child? Kasenhis muttered in exasperation as he adjusted Lockhart's teleportation device. And, just for good measure, he added a binding curse to Lockhart's glasses. Sure, Lockhart had no brains, was terrible at magic, vain, greasy, and had a habit of stealing others' achievements, but at the end of the day, he was still technically human. He didn't quite deserve to die. Besides, he'd been a lot more well-behaved lately. His lessons were less flamboyant, he avoided Kasenhis whenever possible, and when he couldn't, he at least had the decency to paste on an ingratiating smile. A definite improvement from the last time Kasenhis saw him, not to mention the cocky him in Diagon Alley. Give this to him, Kasenhis said, handing Professor Sprout the glasses and the device. And while you're at it, tell him I'm not some man-eating monster. He doesn't need to hide from me like I'm the Grim Reaper. Though, to be fair, I still have a strong urge to plant him in a flower pot next to a mandrake. I'll pass the message along, Sprout replied with a chuckle. Next up was Filch. Unlike the other professors, it seemed his glasses weren't made by Dumbledore, or rather, none of the staff's glasses had been. While they weren't alchemy experts, crafting a simple pair of glasses wasn't exactly difficult for them. For Filch, however, it was a different story. The pair he pulled out was tragic. The lenses were barely holding on, and the temples had been glued back together, complete with dried streaks of hardened adhesive forming an unsightly white crust over the joints. Perhaps he had picked them up somewhere discarded by a student and, too embarrassed to ask the professors for help, had clumsily glued them back together himself. Kasenhis glanced at the battered glasses, then looked up at Filch, who seemed a bit uncomfortable. With a sigh, he pulled out a piece of parchment and a quill. Draw the style of glasses you like. I'll make you a proper pair. Filch hesitated for a moment before stiffly taking the quill. After a long pause, he muttered, Thank you. Once Filch's teleportation device was finally completed, Kasenhis could at last retreat back to his office. He pulled out the parchment and quill once again. It's about time I designed myself a custom skin. Oh, wait, I mean, custom glasses. Chapter 94 Confused Tom. Hogwarts' second-floor corridor. A massive, slimy, and slippery basilisk slithered out of a broken pipe, its forked tongue flicking through the air. Inside its head, resident tenant Tom Riddle swiftly locked onto a suitable prey. A small wizard, clad in robes but sporting a pair of denim jeans underneath, was hopping along, a clear sign of a muggle born. Tom had already made up his mind. Sure, the basilisk's deadly gaze had embarrassingly failed against a young wizard's glasses not long ago, but that kind of humiliation would not happen again. Even if this unlucky little wizard was wearing glasses, no problem, he'd simply whip his tail and smash them into pieces. Then, he could use those shattered remains to mark his triumphant return. Everything unfolded exactly as he had predicted. The Muggle-born wizard was petrified on the spot. Just as Tom prepared to swing the basilisk's tail and finish the job. Bzzzzzt. A sudden boom echoed through the corridor. The petrified wizard vanished instantly, leaving not even a speck of dust behind. SSSSSSSS what? Alchemy class. Professor, where are your glasses? Fred Weasley looked at Kasenhis with confusion. They're right here, aren't they? Clipped onto my left eye socket. Kasenhis responded nonchalantly. But Professor, didn't you say yesterday that when choosing between aesthetic appeal and one's own life, we should always choose life? Meyer, the first unfortunate student to receive a binding curse on his glasses, asked with a rather resentful expression. And who says I haven't chosen life? The next moment, a faint blue energy shield flickered in front of Kasenhis' eyes, appearing for just a second before vanishing. Professor, why don't we have that? Oh, come on, even Dumbledore doesn't get this kind of luxury. Now, keep going with the next question. But, to lift your spirits a little, if your entire class scores E on the upcoming monthly exam, I'll... Kasenhis suddenly paused. Fred, close the back door. George, close the front door. I'll teach you something that's highly likely to get you sent to Azkaban. Underscore. The moment he said that, the entire classroom perked up, eyes gleaming with excitement. Fred and George, meanwhile, immediately poked their heads outside to check the corridor. Once they confirmed no one was around, they firmly shut the doors. Professor, go ahead. We promise we won't tell anyone. Fred said, barely containing his enthusiasm. Oh, please. Last time I said something like this, my lesson didn't even leave the room, and somehow the whole school knew about it. Kasenhis didn't believe a single word from these kids. All right, everyone stand up. With that, he personally went around confiscating every single magical recording device in the room, including, but not limited to, enchanted cameras, memory-keeping crystal balls, and every possible object capable of storing images or audio. Once he finished securing the evidence, Kasenhis smiled mischievously as he stood at the podium. Have you all mastered the use of the mystic golem? Yes. Good. Now, I'm going to show you something absolutely insane. Everyone, step back. As he spoke, Kasenhis pulled out a massive supply of milk bottles and handed them out to every student in the classroom. The young wizards watched with curiosity as their respected, virtuous, selfless, tirelessly devoted, and endlessly patient Professor Kasenhis pulled out a wailing, shrieking block that let out unsettling cries. He placed the block in a T-shape in the center of the classroom. Then 3 wither skeleton skulls were carefully positioned on top. In an instant, the soul sand structure transformed into a towering, jet-black skeletal monster, a floating, limbless abomination consisting only of a spine and ribcage. Its 3 skulls, gaping wide, seemed to be screaming in eerie, soundless agony. Kasenhis quickly surrounded the wither with a prison of obsidian and iron bars before turning back to face the wide-eyed students. This thing is called a wither cool, right? Wicked. Yeah, well, I'm not giving it to you. This thing is way too dangerous for you lot. Don't be fooled by how calmly it's floating around inside. Once it fully awakens, the first thing it'll do is obliterate every living thing in the room. But I'm not showing you this so you can go around blowing yourselves up or start thinking you're some kind of Pokemon trainer. No, I'm showing you this because it can be used as a protective charm. Professor. Are you saying this thing can be made into a protective charm? Angelina stared at the wailing, horrifying creature trapped behind Kasenhis, her worldview shattering as she asked in disbelief. Of course, I'm not telling you to use the full-sized version as a protective charm, Kasenhis replied calmly. I'll be giving you miniature materials to create small-scale withers. Because the raw materials will have insufficient energy, they won't awaken into full-fledged withers. If they ever do wake up, the only way they can sustain themselves is by devouring various spiritual entities, things like Inferi, Dementors, even regular ghosts. So, I strongly recommend never lifting the restrictions on them. Their screams are inaudible to humans, but to spiritual creatures, it's as unbearable as the sound of nails on a chalkboard for us. After finishing his explanation, Kasenhis took a tactical sip from his insulated cup, enjoying his oolong tea. And one last thing, don't even think about gathering all your materials together to create a full-sized wither. Unless, of course, you'd like a group trip to Azkaban with me included. Professor, then what about this big guy you just summoned? George suddenly raised his hand, pointing at the caged wither. That's why I had you lock both doors. This lesson is strictly between us, no outsiders will ever know. Well said. Very well said, indeed. An old, familiar voice suddenly spoke from behind Kasenhis. Dumbledore. Moving unhurriedly, he placed a hand firmly on Kasenhis' shoulder. Kasenhis, come with me for a moment. But first, deal with this thing. Oh, of course. Would you like some tea? I don't mind sharing, Kasenhis said stiffly, turning to look at Dumbledore. Deal with that thing first. Right, right. Of course. Kasenhis hurriedly constructed an obsidian cage, then sent a series of end crystals flying into it in a neat row. Within moments, he reached inside and pulled out a glowing nether star from the remains of the wither. Want it? It's a gift, he offered casually. No, thank you. You keep it, Dumbledore declined. As the two of them left the classroom, Kasenhis didn't forget to quickly dismiss the students. In the blink of an eye, they arrived at the headmaster's office. What happened? Oh. Colin Creevey, Dumbledore explained. His dorm mates were in the middle of a wizard's chess match when his petrified body suddenly teleported onto his bed. While Dumbledore spoke, Kasenhis already had a healing light in his hand, slowly channeling it into Colin's body. Within moments, Colin was fully restored. Leave me, you motherfu*** king snake, oh professor. The first thing he saw was Kasenhis, not a terrifying giant snake, and he immediately let out a breath of relief. The next second, he flung himself at Kasenhis, bawling his eyes out. Chapter 95 Loyalty. Kasenhis and Dumbledore spent a good while calming Colin down. It wasn't until Dumbledore called his friends back that he finally settled down. Clutching his new glasses, Colin followed his friends back to Gryffindor Tower. Well, at least the situation is still within acceptable limits for now, Dumbledore murmured as he sank into his chair. And that's why you're the headmaster, able to just sit there and take it, Kasenhis said, giving Dumbledore a thumbs up. I know you're mocking me. Put that thumb away. Good. Kasenhis nodded thoughtfully, then flashed his middle finger instead. I've been looking into Hogwarts history, trying to figure out where this basilisk which has been lurking in the castle for nearly 70 years actually came from. And unfortunately, I found out that this snake's history goes back even further than Professor Binns, our ghostly history of magic teacher. Dumbledore pulled out a parchment, detailing all the information he had compiled about the Hogwarts basilisk. It contained a mix of records from Hogwarts, a history, the history of magic, various folktales, and all sorts of miscellaneous legends, all tied together into one comprehensive document. Kasenhis took a closer look and realized this basilisk really had been around far longer than Professor Binns. Its origins could be traced all the way back to the days when the four founders were still alive. Apparently, Salazar Slytherin had built a chamber deep within the castle, and legend had it that only his true heir could unlock it. Inside, they would find a treasure, one that could help them purge all impure blood from Hogwarts. Slytherin's house animal is a snake, so your reasoning actually makes sense, Kasenhis mused. So when Voldemort possessed Lockhart, he had Lockhart plant the diary inside the chamber ahead of time. When his soul left Lockhart, it was drawn back to the Horcrux diary, which conveniently led him straight to the so-called treasure of Slytherin, the basilisk. Makes perfect sense. Kasenhis nodded in agreement. Now, all we need to do is find the chamber of Slytherin's actual location. I've put together a list of notable living members of Slytherin's history. Perhaps if we ask them, we might learn something useful. Dumbledore stood up, pulled a parchment from the bookshelf behind him, and handed it to Kasenhis. Kasenhis took it and glanced over the names. Well, I know all of them. But I'm only acquainted with them at best. If they do know anything about this deeply hidden secret, I highly doubt they'd spill it to me. After all, their children and relatives aren't the ones being hunted by Slytherin's heir. He set the list down on the desk, recognizing every name on it. The oldest among them was Horace Slughorn. Kasenhis had met him once at a ministry banquet, where he had managed to walk away with a bottle of Felix Felicis. The youngest? Snape. Sure, Snape always looked like he had a personal vendetta against Joy, but he wasn't the kind of person who would treat his students' lives lightly. Besides, just last term, Draco had called Hermione a mudblood, and Snape had reacted pretty strongly to it. He probably didn't harbor actual hatred toward Muggle-born wizards. Tom has already lost his mind. I don't even consider purebloods safe anymore, so I'll keep my thoughts to myself. Kasenhis rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Oh. The Weasley family is considered pureblood, right? According to mainstream wizarding opinion. Yes. That's why I say the Weasley family knows how to raise their children properly. If the other pureblood families put even half the effort the Weasleys do into teaching their kids, the wizarding world would have a much brighter future ahead. Unlike professors, who had the bad habit of going off-topic mid-lecture, Dumbledore, who had long since stopped being a professor, was perfectly skilled at redirecting conversations back on track. I've instructed Hagrid to buy a large number of roosters since they're natural basilisk killers. Do you know about Muggle phonographs? Kasenhis asked. Hogwarts might interfere with electromagnetic signals, but old-fashioned record players should still work. You clearly don't manage household finances, Dumbledore remarked. Buying roosters is cheaper. Fine. Anything else? Not for now. Midway through his sentence, Dumbledore suddenly paused, realizing that he still hadn't settled the Wither incident with Kasenhis. Although, about the part where you had students create dangerous alchemical creatures. Ah. I need to go. Goodbye. Escape successful. Kasenhis fled back to the alchemy office, finally letting out a breath of relief. His eyes landed on the glowing red crystal ball sitting on his desk. He pressed the button underneath it. A moment later, Neville came flying in on a broomstick. The gift he had made for Harry had already been delivered in advance. After all, with the binding curse on these glasses lasting who knows how long, there was a chance he wouldn't have another opportunity to give it later. But this time, Neville had brought something else. A brand new project. Ron's wand is hand-me-down from one of his older brothers. He has a hard time using it properly. I want to help him. How should I go about it? Kasenhis, lounging on the sofa with his legs crossed, replied, It's not just Ron's wand. I also noticed yours is quite old. But the Longbottom family is far better off financially than the Weasleys. Mind telling me why? Neville tightened his grip on his wand. This was my father's wand. I don't want to lose it. My condolences. I'm sure he's in a better place right now and is happy watching you from the stars. Neville awkwardly shook his head. He's not dead, not in a better place either, and certainly not happily watching me. He's alive. Just, not in his right mind at St. Mungo's. Asterisk. Ah. Yeah, I don't really know how to comfort you on that one. What happened to them? Neville shook his head again. I don't know. Then don't worry about it. If you can't remember, don't force yourself to. Kasenhis leaned forward. So, you want to make Ron a wand that actually suits him? That's easy. A glowing book appeared in Kasenhis' hand. This enchantment book contains the loyalty spell. All you have to do is let Ron enchant his wand using this book. Or, if you want, you can do it for him, just tweak a few things in the spell settings. Neville stared at the enchantment book, clearly tempted. Can I just sneak into his room tonight and take his wand for a bit? Tap. Ow. Neville clutched his head. Professor, why did you hit me? Colin Creevey, a first year, was just petrified by the basilisk in broad daylight, and now you're thinking about sneaking out at night. Kasenhis scolded, sounding thoroughly disappointed. But, don't we have the safety teleportation system you designed? Then you better pray that when it finds you, it only tries to kill you with its eyes and not by swallowing you whole with its giant, gaping mouth. Kasenhis sighed, utterly speechless. Chapter 96, A Talking Wall? Professor, don't be mad. Neville, now far more confident than he had been in first year, grinned mischievously, playfully whining at Kasenhis in hopes of getting forgiveness. Forget it. Here's your assignment for today: decrypt the logic behind this enchantment book. Figure out why this enchantment makes an object remain loyal to its wielder. Then, write me a report. You can choose between 10 inches of parchment or 5,000 words, whichever you prefer. With that, Kasenhis tossed the enchantment book over to Neville, leaving him to study and decode it. Kasenhis remained comfortably seated on the sofa, still lounging with his legs crossed. Meanwhile, across the room, the red crystal ball on his office desk lit up once again. Casually, he tossed the book in his hand toward it. The throw was dead accurate. Just as the office door swung open, Harry appeared, standing at the entrance. From afar, he could see Neville buried in study at the office desk while Professor Kasenhis relaxed without a care in the world. Then, he remembered. 10 minutes ago, in a moment of sheer stupidity, he had lent his broomstick to Neville. And now at this moment, Harry wanted to die. Of course, that feeling remained purely theoretical. He wasn't actually going to die. Even if the road ahead was long and arduous, he still had to walk it himself. Kasenhis finished reading an entire magazine, then glanced up in Harry's direction. Seeing that Harry had only made it halfway, he thought for a moment before pulling out another magazine and started reading again. By the time Kasenhis had gotten through half of his second magazine, Harry, now wearing the silver-rimmed glasses Neville had made for him, finally arrived, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Not bad, you're in good shape, just what I'd expect from a seeker." Kasenhis gave Harry a rare compliment, pouring him a cup of tea as he spoke. "UG. Thanks, Professor." Harry downed the tea in one go, still panting as he continued, "This morning, I went to the library to return some books. On my way back, I heard this weird sound. It was like it was coming from the walls. Or maybe, from inside the walls." "Take your time, speak slowly," Kasenhis said, setting down his magazine on the coffee table. Then, he glanced at Neville. "Neville, keep studying. Not everything interesting is your business." "Professor," Harry pressed on, "I also heard whatever was inside the wall talking." "What did it say?" Harry took a deep breath, tilting his head back instinctively as he recalled the words. "It said a lot about you." Neville, who had been trying to eavesdrop, immediately looked up. Only to be smacked in the head by a flying block. "Go on," Kasenhis said, unfazed. The voice said something like, "Why did it disappear? What is this? Spatial magic? Alchemy? It's alchemy. Only a few decades have passed, and I can't recognize alchemy anymore. Damn alchemy! Damn Kasenhis! This is definitely his doing." "I don't remember the exact order of what it said, and the voice wasn't particularly clear, but that's everything I managed to remember," Harry explained. Kasenhis scratched his chin awkwardly. "Where exactly did you hear this creepy voice?" Harry scratched his head, thinking. "In the second-floor corridor at Hogwarts." "The second-floor corridor? Was it a ghost?" Kasenhis frowned. "But I don't remember having any issues with any ghosts. Even Peeves asks me for permission before pulling pranks on me." Harry thought back again. "Oh. Professor Kasenhis." The voice's position kept changing. Sometimes it was coming from the ceiling of the corridor, sometimes from the walls, and at times, even from beneath the floor. To be honest, this is kinda outside my area of expertise, but I can make a reasonable deduction. Why did it disappear, and what is this?" These two sentences are connected. There's probably a missing part, something like "what's happening here," or "what kind of situation is this?" But, why did it disappear? I haven't created any alchemical constructs that would randomly disappear. Even the iron golems are still in hibernation where I left them. Wait a minute. Kasenhis suddenly realized something. "Harry, around what time did you hear the voice? And in what order did it change locations?" Harry thought for a moment. "It was around 9 in the morning. The voice's positions went something like this. Started from beneath the floor. Moved to the left wall. Shifted to the ceiling. Moved to the right wall. Finally returned to the floor before disappearing completely. 9 o'clock. That means around 9:40. The voice first appeared from the second-floor corridor." Kasenhis abruptly stood up. "Stay here, don't go anywhere. I have something to check." Kasenhis immediately teleported away with an ender pearl. Neville, still curious, lifted his head, wanting to ask Harry what exactly was going on. The next second. Bam! Kasenhis teleported right behind him and mercilessly delivered a divine smack from above. "I knew you'd get distracted. Focus and study." After administering justice, Kasenhis teleported once again, this time appearing in the headmaster's office. "Where is everyone?" He blinked in confusion. The portraits of past headmasters were all dozing off, not a single one awake. "Oh! No one here to answer my questions? What a shame!" Muttering to himself, Kasenhis casually strolled toward the corner cabinet, intending to check if there were any of Dumbledore's personal liquor reserves left. Then a cough, Kasenhis immediately snapped his head up, scanning the room. Nothing. No living creatures in sight. Humph. Must have been my imagination, he muttered, turning back to search for alcohol. Ahem. Kasenhis looked up again, only to see nothing again. I'm up here. This time, he finally pinpointed the source of the voice. It was coming from above from the sorting hat. Oh. I thought you could only talk during the sorting ceremony, Kasenhis said, feeling a little awkward. I've always been able to speak, the sorting hat replied. Otherwise, who do you think writes Hogwarts sorting song every year? A talented hat, indeed, Kasenhis acknowledged. Now, could you do me a favor and keep quiet about what I'm doing? Dumbledore's getting old, too much alcohol isn't good for him, you know. The sorting hat nodded slightly. I understand. However, I don't think I need to keep quiet about anything. Kasenhis frowned. What do you mean? You might want to turn around and take a look. Kasenhis turned around. And there was Dumbledore, smiling at him. Oh. Without missing a beat, Kasenhis casually stuffed the bottle of alcohol he had just found into his ring, smoothly closed the cabinet, and without a single change in expression asked. By the way, what time was Colin Creevey teleport back to his bed today? 9:38. Just as I thought. Kasenhis flashed a knowing smirk, the kind only a true genius could wear. Without wasting any time, he quickly recounted everything Harry had told him to Dumbledore, including his own deductions. In other words, the strange voice Harry heard had actually been the basilisk speaking. As long as there were pipes within the walls of Hogwarts large enough for the basilisk to move through. Not only did the timing match, but even the strange words Harry overheard lined up perfectly. The "why did it disappear" was referring to why Colin Creevey suddenly vanished. But honestly, Voldemort is quite impressive. Even while possessing a snake, he can still distinguish between spatial magic and alchemy. Dumbledore, on the other hand, remained completely silent, eerily so. Kasenhis was just about to ask when the sorting hat, still sitting atop the cabinet, interrupted him. He's probably thinking about something very important right now. I suggest you don't disturb him. Oh. Of course. After about 30 seconds, Kasen stood up and reached over to take the sorting hat down. Would you be able to sort someone who never received a Hogwarts acceptance letter? You want me to sort you? The sorting hat asked. Can you? He asked. Haha, you are such an interesting wizard, place me on your head, kid. Kasen nodded, sat on the sofa in the corner of the office, shook off the dust from the sorting hat, and put it on his head. Chapter 97. I think I want to die. The sorting hat murmured softly atop Kasenhis head. Before it could even speak, however, Dumbledore swiftly yanked it off. He calmly placed the hat back onto the cabinet, then turned to Kasenhis with a knowing smile in his eyes. I need a damn explanation. The sorting hat and I had a mutual understanding. Who the hell are you to interfere? Because you're not ready yet. Trust me, it won't be long. But let's get back to business. You were wondering whether the voice Harry heard could have been the basilisk itself, or perhaps Tom controlling the basilisk. Kasenhis subtly glanced at the sorting hat, now back on the cabinet. He silently vowed that one day, when Dumbledore wasn't around, he would absolutely steal it. Of course, none of these thoughts were visible on his face. Instead, he maintained a completely serious expression and replied. Magic is vast and unpredictable. That kind of thing should be possible, right? Dumbledore nodded. Indeed. For example, Parseltongue. You mean a person can understand snakes? Not just that you can speak their language and even command them. Harry's going to love hearing this, Kasenhis said dryly. I mean, it's a special talent, at the very least. Not exactly, Dumbledore corrected. Parseltongue is one of Salazar Slytherin's defining traits. Every known Parselmouth since him has become an exceptionally powerful dark wizard. It would be best to warn Harry and tell him to keep this a secret. That's just survivor bias. Too bad no one in the wizarding world teaches math, Kasenhis muttered, watching as Dumbledore stood up. He rolled his eyes and got up as well. I'm going to check out the corridor Harry mentioned. Maybe I can trace the pipes and find out where those two are hiding. If you didn't take enough, Dumbledore gestured toward the cabinet in the corner, you can grab a few more bottles. Really? Of course, as long as you accept an advance deduction from your salary. Never mind. Back in the alchemy office. Returning to his office, Kasenhis stretched deeply, cracking his back as he did. Harry was lounging comfortably on the sofa, munching on a bag of chips, while Neville the poor, studious soul was hunched over his books, head buried deep in study. In his left hand a giant rune dictionary. In his right the enchantment book. Right now, his entire focus was on figuring out why the damn rune characters were behaving so inconsistently. Was this a bug? Did Professor Kasenhis create something with a flaw? Impossible. Absolutely impossible. It had to be his own mistake. Time to go over it all again. If Kasenhis knew what was going on inside Neville's head right now, he probably wouldn't care. After all, strictly speaking, it wasn't a bug, it was a feature. If something is replicable, doesn't that make it a feature? Professor, how did it go? Harry asked. Oh, nothing major, Kasenhis replied casually. The voice you heard was probably the basilisk. In other words, you're a parcel mouth. Neville, who had been scribbling calculations on a blank parchment, accidentally pressed too hard, nearly dragging his quill straight across Harry's face. He looked up immediately, staring at both a completely bewildered Harry and a perfectly relaxed Kasenhis. That can't be right, Harry is a parcel mouth. Kasenhis nodded. Yep. At least, based on what he told me so far, that seems to be the case. But Dumbledore also told me to advise you to not tell this to others. Wait, what does that even mean? Harry asked, still completely lost. For as long as history has recorded, every known Parselmouth has come from Slytherin's bloodline, and almost all of them have been famous dark wizards. From Salazar Slytherin himself to Voldemort, every last one of them, Kasenhis explained matter-of-factly, while simultaneously shoving Neville's head back down toward his parchment. Students should focus on being students, after all. At the same time, he thoroughly enjoyed watching Harry put down his chips. Harry collapsed onto the sofa as if someone had pulled out his spine, his entire body limp and lifeless. Even the light in his eyes had completely disappeared. I'm a dark wizard. I'm a dark wizard. I'm a dark wizard. No wonder the Sorting Hat wanted to put me in Slytherin. I am a dark wizard. Hey, I said you shouldn't go boasting around. Who said you're a dark wizard? Kasenhis asked, looking mildly confused as he reached out and ruffled Harry's hair. The others just happened to be dark wizards who shared the same trait as you. I'm a dark wizard. I'm a dark wizard. I'm a dark wizard, sniff. I don't want to be a dark wizard. I'm a dark wizard. Kasenhis turned to Neville. Is he always like this in the dormitory? Actually, this only happens when he's here. Neville hesitated, then added, I think it's kind of like when a kid whines to their dad. Ron acts like this sometimes with his father too. Wow. Thanks a lot, Harry. Kasenhis sighed. You just turned a perfectly respectable young professor into, well, a dad. Technically speaking, he had already graduated from Manchester before coming here. Strictly speaking, he wasn't that young anymore. Professor, what should I do? Harry suddenly snapped back to life, looking up at Kasenhis. Just bear in mind, aside from your closest friends, don't tell anyone about this, Kasenhis said seriously. Your closest friends will comfort you, go to great lengths to help you feel better, and make sure you don't feel alone. But if you tell the wrong people, they'll use it as ammunition against you. Harry nodded dazedly, processing the words. Professor, why do you look so weird? Kasenhis waved a hand dismissively. It's nothing. You just reminded me of something annoying. You said the Sorting Hat wanted to put you in Slytherin, right? Well, I just remembered something frustrating of my own. What? Both Harry and Neville, who really should have been focusing on his calculations, looked up at the same time. I was in Dumbledore's office just now, trying to get the Sorting Hat to sort me, but Dumbledore interrupted me. That old bumblebee with a sweat tooth, that ancient meddler. Anyway, let's drop that. Did you remember everything I told you? Kasenhis turned to Harry. Harry nodded, though whether or not he actually remembered was another story. By the time he left, he had completely forgotten about taking back the broom Neville had. Maybe his brain was still buzzing too much to process it all. Once Harry was gone, Neville finally got back into the right headspace. Professor, come look at these two runes. Something feels off about them, no matter how I look at it. Kasenhis glanced over, then leaned back on the sofa, flipping open a magazine while casually responding. Exactly, Neville. That's why I told you to study. The runes in dictionaries and the runes in practical use are completely different. Then what about the punishment? I mean paper. Still 10 inches of parchment or 5,000 words. If you write it well, there's a chance it could get published in the European Alchemy Journal. Professor. I think I want to die a little. What nonsense are you talking about? Chapter 98 Kasenhis. All in all, Harry was smart enough to keep his parcel tongue ability a secret. At the very least, when Kasenhis woke up the next morning, he didn't hear any weird rumors floating around the school. As for our poor Neville, his merciless studies had already driven him to Madame Pomfrey to ask for hair regrowth potion. But hey, he was a Gryffindor. And Gryffindors? They had guts. For example, when Neville picked up his hair potion, he also swiped a bottle of draught of living death. And then? He knocked Ron out cold in the dormitory. Just like that, Neville arrived at the alchemy classroom, holding Ron's old wand in one hand and Harry's broomstick in the other. Originally, I wanted to save all their gifts for Christmas, Neville explained as he carefully engraved the loyalty enchantment onto Ron's wand at the enchantment table. But then, Harry's glasses ended up being given early, and Ron constantly struggling with an ill-fitting wand was just too painful to watch. So I figured why not just give it to him now. From the work area of the office, Kasenhis was busy constructing a magical ritual platform, stacking arcane stone bricks and arcane steps both synthesized from stone and monocrystals. What about Hermione? What are you planning to give her? I checked her Christmas card list. She wants a pet. But that's not something I can create with alchemy. Neville admitted. At first, I thought about making her a small mystic golem the same kind everyone gets in third year, but that thing's cold and lifeless. I don't think Hermione would like it. If I have time, I'll go with you to Diagon Alley to pick something out for her, Kasenhis offered. With a flick of his wand, he pointed at the fully constructed ritual platform. In an instant, the platform transformed, shifting into a massive arcane imbuement table. At its center, a floating black cube radiated glowing light from its cracks. Done. Done. Kasenhis and Neville spoke in unison, but Neville, still confused, turned toward Kasenhis. Merlin's beard, Professor, what the hell is this? Neville stared, completely baffled, at the massive, unheard-of arcane imbuement table. As for what it does, no clue yet, Kasenhis admitted. Oh, right Neville, go over to the essence bottling machine and bring me all the filled jars. As he spoke, he casually took Ron's now enchanted wand from Neville's hands. What kind of nightmare story has this wand been through? He muttered to himself, before discreetly hiding his own wand up his sleeve. After all, if Ron's wand were a horror movie, his own wand was a naive little bunny being forced to watch it. It might get traumatized. Willow wood, unicorn hair. I don't have Willow here. Kasenhis paused, then turned to Neville. Hold on a bit, I need to step out. And just like that, he was gone. Leaving Neville alone in the office. With over 30 jars of bottled magical essence. Well, this is awkward. Meanwhile at the Whomping Willow. Kasenhis crept forward like a sneaky thief, carefully approaching the Whomping Willow. Once he was close enough, he didn't hesitate in an instant, his diamond sword was in hand, and with one swift chop, he sliced off a small willow branch. Then, just as swiftly, he teleported back. Whomping Willow. Damn, that was efficient. He looked around, surprised to see that Neville had already finished moving all the essence jars. Even using a levitation charm, moving 2 jars at a time should have taken at least a few minutes, but somehow, Neville had finished it all ridiculously fast. And then, Neville showed off. With a wave of his wand and a quick incantation, all 30+ jars levitated into the air at the same time. This is the expected magic level for a third year? Kasenhis asked, utterly bewildered. I practiced for a long time. Just got used to it, Neville admitted, looking a bit embarrassed. Impressive, impressive. After genuinely praising Neville, Kasenhis sent him off to place candles around the imbuement table. After all, infusing magic into an object could fail, but adding candles increased the stability of the enchantment process, reducing the risk of failure. Meanwhile, Kasenhis himself carefully peeled apart the willow branch, separating it into fine wood fibers as he began repairing Ron's old wand. Oh, right Neville, where's your own wand? Neville, who was placing candles beneath the glass floor of the imbuement table, suddenly paused for a moment. I didn't enchant my own wand, he admitted. I keep thinking, maybe one day, my parents will recover. When that happens, I'll need to give it back to my dad. They're in St. Mungo's, aren't they? Kasenhis asked. Yet. Afternoon. Neville rushed out of the office in a panic, probably because he miscalculated the dose when drugging Ron, and the guy was about to wake up too soon. Meanwhile, Kasenhis pulled out a roll of black silk from his cabinet and placed it directly onto the imbuement table. He planned to infuse it with magic and later make a few enchanted outfits. Then buff. The entire imbuement table exploded. Cough. A lifetime of brilliance, and I forgot to light the damn candles. Looking a little worse for wear, Kasenhis fixed his hair, rebuilt the entire imbuement table, and pulled out a fresh roll of silk. Evening. After leaving his office, Kasenhis headed toward the Great Hall for dinner. Along the way, every single student he passed looked at him and smiled strangely. What's going on? He grabbed a random student, Carnier, by the collar. Carnier, do I have something weird on my back? Carnier shook his head and answered innocently. No, Professor. Nothing at all. Kasenhis wasn't convinced. He took off his wizard's robe, carefully inspected it from all angles. Nothing. Weird. Some prank from the Weasley twins? What's so funny about this? Still puzzled, Kasenhis continued toward the Great Hall. When he arrived, the strange atmosphere only intensified. Every single student, even the professors, were looking at him with that same eerie smile. Dumbledore, what the hell is going on? Did the fact that I taught students how to create withers finally get exposed? Is the Ministry of Magic about to storm into Hogwarts, inspect the Floo network, and drag me straight to Azkaban? Oh, no, no, of course not, Dumbledore said with a casual shake of his head, looking completely unbothered. But he offered no further explanation. Soon, Professor McGonagall entered, holding the Sorting Hat in one hand. Behind her, the Weasley twins carried a chair between them. What's happening? Is Hogwarts accepting transfer students now? Kasenhis asked again, still confused. You'll find out soon enough, McGonagall replied. She directed the Weasley twins to place the chair in the center of the Great Hall, then pulled out a parchment from her pocket. She cleared her throat and announced, the sorting ceremony will now begin. Then. Kasenhis. Chapter 99. We are all Hufflepuffs tonight. Kasenhis stared blankly at Dumbledore, utterly confused. Dumbledore winked at him. I said we weren't ready yet, not that you couldn't be sorted. You explicitly said I wasn't ready, Kasenhis muttered under his breath. Same, but different. Now, hurry up. Dumbledore grinned, urging him forward. With no other choice, Kasenhis reluctantly walked toward Professor McGonagall. As he sat down, he whispered, You really should have consulted me first, this is embarrassing. Consider it a surprise. McGonagall placed the Sorting Hat firmly on his head. Hufflepuff. The entire Great Hall erupted into thunderous applause, so loud it was almost frightening. Professor Sprout stood up gracefully from the staff table, held her head high, and proudly walked down toward Kasenhis. She then bowed twice, once to the students of all four houses and once to her fellow professors at the staff table. Kasenhis, feeling incredibly awkward, stood up, placed the Sorting Hat back on the chair, and prepared to leave. After all, this was practically public humiliation, but Professor Sprout stopped him. Reaching into her pocket, she pulled out an intricately crafted brooch made of obsidian and gold. Come on, try it on. Kasenhis took the brooch and pinned it to his chest. Looks great. As long as it looks good, that's all that matters, Professor Sprout nodded approvingly before turning to face the Hufflepuff table. Welcome your new housemate. Kasenhis suddenly had a bad feeling. The next second, the entire Hufflepuff table rushed toward him. Oh no, retreat. Kasenhis was about to run, deciding not to use teleportation but his own legs instead. Then, he was grabbed from both sides by two familiar redheads. Wait, aren't you guys Gryffindors? He asked in confusion. The twins exchanged a glance, then shrugged. Doesn't matter tonight, we're all Hufflepuffs. As soon as the twins said that, it was as if the other three houses had discovered a whole new world. The only difference was that Gryffindor and Ravenclaw joined in purely for the fun of it. Slytherin, on the other hand, only had the students who took alchemy rushing toward Kasenhis. "Professor, do you know what's about to happen?" Cedric suddenly grabbed Kasenhis by the shoulder and asked in a low voice. "You guys aren't going to toss me into the air like after a Quidditch victory, are you?" Cedric flashed a bright smile, showing all 8 teeth. "Heh. You wouldn't do that, right?" "Oh ho 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 ha. Dumbledore. I. Motherfoo. Shit. Bloody hell. Holy. That's insane." Seated at the professor's table, Snape clutched a mithril and emerald brooch in his hand before, looking somewhat awkward, he quietly slipped it back into his pocket. Meanwhile, Professor McGonagall held a gold and ruby brooch in her left hand and a lapis lazuli and silver brooch in her right, with bronze accents decorating it. "Severus, I recall you also made a brooch," she remarked. Snape shook his head. "No, you must be mistaken." "Oh, come on, Severus. After all these years, you're still this stubborn." Professor Flitwick commented sharply before using a spell to snatch the brooch from Snape's pocket and hand it to McGonagall. "If Kasenhis finds out he's missing a Slytherin brooch, he might think you have something against him." "I'll just deliver this to him myself," McGonagall said, holding the Slytherin brooch. "Do as you please." Snape buried himself in his meal. For the first time since becoming a professor, he was actually enjoying his food. "Students, put your poor Professor Kasenhis down, you still have a feast to enjoy," McGonagall called out. After some time, Kasenhis' feet finally touched the ground again. "Thanks a lot, guys. Someone help me stand properly. Seriously, I actually have a bit of a fear of heights, well, only when I'm not flying. Once I'm on a broomstick, it's totally fine." Kasenhis barely finished speaking before a Hufflepuff student rushed over, taking 2 quick steps at a time to support him back to the professor's table. "This is for you." Professor McGonagall transfigured 3 small, delicate gift boxes, placed the respective brooches inside, and handed them to Kasenhis. "Much appreciated. Can I open them now?" "Of course." Kasenhis unwrapped all 3 boxes, and soon, his chest was adorned with 3 more brooches. "I've collected all 4 house brooches now. How come I don't have a Hogwarts crest brooch?" he muttered near Dumbledore's ear. "I'm just an old man over 100 years old, I don't know a damn thing about alchemy, right? Humph. Where would I even find the time to make you a Hogwarts brooch?" Dumbledore replied with his eyes half closed. You really don't have to repeat that so many times. Also, Nicolas Flamel said the same thing. Which is why I gave you his Philosopher's Stone. Originally, I planned to return it to Flamel and publicly claim I destroyed it, Dumbledore explained. All right. Kasenhis shrugged. "But I really didn't expect you to be afraid of heights," Professor Flitwick, who had been listening nearby, poked his head over and asked. "Something like that. My fear of heights is quite specific, I'm completely fine when I prepare for it, like when I ride a broomstick. But if I'm suddenly suspended midair without warning, my heart rate skyrockets to an alarming speed. This is simply the body's natural response to mortal danger. Strictly speaking, it doesn't qualify as acrophobia." Snape, who had been eating gracefully, took a moment to comment. "Yeah, maybe," Kasenhis replied, resting his chin on one hand. Too bad, after all this time, he still hadn't managed to get an elytra. But, if it's about flight... For once, he fell into serious thought. The Thaumcraft mod he was currently studying didn't actually contain much traditional magic, just the usual fire, lightning, and light-based spells. What he really relied on were elemental forces. For example, once he fully understood the fire element, he could directly cast fire magic. Likewise, mastering the electric element allowed him to use lightning-based spells. So, if he were to combine the wind element with motion, and synthesize a flight element... this might actually work. Chapter 100 Second-Hand Broom. Professor, is this thing really safe? Neville looked at Kasenhis lying on the stone slab of the imbuement table, surrounded by wind element crystal shards scattered across the surface. The floating cube above the table continued to rotate silently in midair. Relax, I set up a bunch of stability-boosting rituals this time. Absolutely no problem. Oh, right, when you leave later, make sure to take the door with you. Neville shook his head. Professor, I wasn't talking about stability. I meant, can this thing even be applied to a human body? Last time you used it, you were enchanting magical fabric, weren't you? In theory, the enchanting table wasn't supposed to work on no, wait, that's not what I meant, Kasenhis accidentally slipped up, quickly correcting himself. What I meant was this works just like an enchanting table. It can be used on objects or on living beings. You can leave now. And don't forget the door. All right then. Neville nodded, making his way toward the door. But as he passed by a large machine, he quickly ducked behind it, silently peering through the glass toward the imbuement table in the distance. Just in case something did go wrong, he wanted to be ready to rush Professor Kasenhis straight to the hospital wing. Meanwhile, Kasenhis drew his wand and lightly tapped the floating cube above the table. Almost instantly, brilliant blue light burst from the cracks of the cube. At the same time, the imbuement table's magic locked onto the elemental essence inside the nearby bottled jars. The wind element and motion element inside the jars were drawn into the cube, where they began merging into a new essence, the flight element. At the same time, the wind element shards on the table began melting, disappearing into thin air. Boom! Neville's eyes widened in shock. Without hesitation, he jumped onto his broomstick, pushing the Nimbus 2000 to its top speed, diving straight toward the imbuement table like a seeker chasing the snitch. In just an instant, he reached the now destroyed remains of the table, or what was left of it. Apart from the charred, blackened rubble, there wasn't even a trace of anything left behind. Professor Kasen is dead. Neville's face twisted in despair, his balance faltering as he nearly fell off his broomstick. I'd personally suggest that if you are going to fly indoors, you should at least use a slower broomstick. Honestly, full speed on a Nimbus inside an office? I can't believe that was your first instinct. Hearing the teasing yet casual voice, Neville covered his face with his hands and shook his head. The professor is dead, hey! He snapped his head around like a startled deer. Kasenhis was floating midair, legs crossed, one hand resting on his knee, the other gripping the back of Neville's collar to keep him steady. Just like this. Professor. You can fly. What did you think I was doing just now? And why is this so surprising? Also, how little do you think of me that you actually believed I'd die from a basic magic experiment? Kasenhis smiled, lifting Neville by the collar before gently placing him back on the ground. I mean, Professor, you're too. I. Forget it. If you can't say it properly, don't say it at all. He waved a hand, signaling that he was perfectly fine, and that Neville could now go back to his dorm and get some sleep. Meanwhile, he himself had to repair the destroyed imbuement table, along with his poor glass flooring, the candles, and the surrounding essence jars. Sigh. All part of his late-night overtime work. And tomorrow, he still had to wake up early to take Neville to Diagon Alley and buy Hermione's gift. Damn, what a busy life. The next day. Professor, I'm not late, am I? Neville arrived early, standing outside the alchemy office, holding a bag of breakfast. Did you eat already? Kasenhis opened the door, looking at the bag in Neville's hand before asking the most automated, NPC-like question possible. Yes. Oh, come in. Kasenhis naturally took the breakfast bag, sat down in his office area, and started eating. Meanwhile, Neville was mentally calculating his remaining pocket money. This trip to Diagon Alley wasn't just for buying Hermione's gift, he also needed to buy himself a broomstick. Borrowing Harry's broom for so long wasn't exactly ideal, and with Quidditch training becoming more frequent as the match approached, he felt bad asking Harry to lend it to him again and again. Are we heading out now? As soon as Kasenhis finished eating and put on his coat, Neville asked. The sooner we go, the better. Otherwise, I wouldn't have woken up this early. With October approaching, the temperature in England had already started dropping. On top of their coats, both of them also layered up with wind-resistant wizard robes. Professor, I don't understand why aren't we using the Flu network? When I renovated my office, I accidentally blew up the connection to the Flu network, and I really dislike dealing with the ministry. So, I just never bothered to get it fixed. Of course, if you'd rather let Professor McGonagall find out you snuck out against school rules and lose 5 rounds worth of house points, I'd be more than happy to take you to borrow her fireplace instead. No, flying is just fine. Both of them tightened the drawstrings on their wizard robes, and Neville, ever the cautious one, even put on anti-slip gloves, gripping his broomstick handle extra firmly. Let's go. Kasenhis lifted off, flying straight out through the open lattice window of the office, while Neville carefully followed, tentatively slipping through. Before long, they had left a pet shop in Diagon Alley. This cat doesn't look great, does it? Look at that face, it looks like it got flattened by an anvil. Kasenhis stared down at the big-faced cat, curled lazily inside its cage. The cat lazily lifted its eyelids, gave Kasenhis a brief glance, then turned its head away, as if refusing to acknowledge such rude comments. If she doesn't like it, I can take it home and let my grandmother care for it. But I think Hermione would like it. I remember she likes uniquely looking creatures. Uniquely looking. Kasenhis rubbed his chin, glancing upward as if in deep thought, but in reality, his eyes subtly shifted toward the big-faced cat in the cage. Well, I won't deny it. It's definitely distinctive. Soon, the two of them headed to the broom shop. The Longbottom family wasn't lacking in money, but high-end alchemical items like broomsticks, which were the wizarding equivalent of motorcycles, were far beyond what a second-year student could afford on his own. So, the only option was to buy second-hand. I just thought of a new project for you to study. As they walked out of the second-hand broom shop, Kasenhis glanced at the sweeping 7 stars in Neville's hands, and a light bulb suddenly popped up at a 45-degree angle in his head.
Thanks for listening.